Lucas Reed had 30 minutes to change his life. 30 minutes to reach the Carter Industries building, walk through those glass doors, and prove he was worth something. His tie was already choking him. His shirt clung to his back in the merciless August heat. 29 minutes now. He could see the building's silver edge in the distance. Then he saw her, a young woman stumbling into the crosswalk, swaying like a candle flame about to die. Everyone else kept walking. Lucas stopped. His phone buzzed with a reminder. Interview in 28 minutes. He looked at her. He looked at his future. And he chose. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's see what happens when one good deed costs everything. The crosswalk signal was flashing red. Cars idled at the intersection, engines rumbling in the thick summer air that tasted like exhaust and hot asphalt. Lucas Reed stood on the curb, his leather portfolio clutched against his chest like a shield, watching the numbers count down. 27 minutes until the interview that would determine whether he spent the next year climbing out of debt or drowning in it. He'd rehearsed his answers 40 times, memorized every bullet point on his resume, researched Carter Industries until he could recite their quarterly earnings in his sleep. This wasn't just another interview. This was the interview. The kind that only came around once, if you were lucky. The kind that separated people who made it from people who didn't. Lucas was 26 years old, and he was tired of being the person who didn't. The light changed. He stepped off the curb, joining the river of people who flowed across the intersection like they had somewhere important to be. Most of them probably did. Lucas walked faster, weaving between slower pedestrians, his mind already in that conference room, shaking hands with the hiring manager, delivering his carefully crafted opening statement. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just another body in the crowd, a young woman in a navy blue blazer and skirt, professional attire that mirrored half the people on this street. But something about her movement caught his eye. She wasn't walking with the crowd's rhythm. She was drifting, veering slightly to the left, then overcorrecting to the right, like a boat with a broken rudder. Lucas slowed his pace, watching her. She brought one hand up to her forehead, pressed her palm against her temple. Even from 20 feet away, he could see how pale she was. Not just fair-skinned, drained. The kind of pallor that made someone look like they were painted in watercolors instead of oils. She took another step and stumbled. The crowd parted around her automatically, the way water flows around a stone. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked back. They were all heading somewhere, focused on their own destinations, their own deadlines, their own lives that were apparently more important than the woman who was clearly struggling to stay upright. Lucas checked his phone. 25 minutes. The woman stumbled again, this time nearly colliding with a man in a gray suit who muttered something sharp and stepped around her without breaking stride. She was in the middle of the crosswalk now, surrounded by movement, but somehow completely alone. The pedestrian signal was already flashing the orange hand, 10 seconds until it turned red again. 10 seconds until cars started moving through this intersection. She swayed, and Lucas saw her knees buckle. He didn't think. Thinking would have reminded him about the interview, about the 3 months of unemployment that had emptied his savings account, about the landlord who'd started leaving pointed notes about rent being due on the 1st, not the 5th. Thinking would have kept him walking. Instead, Lucas ran. He covered the distance in seconds, dropping his portfolio and catching the woman just as her legs gave out completely. She collapsed against him, her weight suddenly heavy in his arms, and he could feel how her whole body was trembling. Up close, she looked young, maybe his age, maybe younger, with dark hair that had fallen loose from what had probably been a neat bun that morning. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Hey," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was hammering. "Hey, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Around them, the crowd continued to flow past, giving them a wide berth, but never stopping. Lucas looked up at the pedestrian signal. 5 seconds. 4. 3. He half-carried, half-dragged the woman toward the far curb, her feet barely touching the ground. They made it to the sidewalk just as the light changed and cars began moving through the intersection, their tires hissing against the hot pavement. Lucas eased the woman down onto the concrete, propping her against a streetlight pole in the narrow strip of shade it provided. Can you hear me? He tried again, lightly tapping her shoulder. Miss? Can you open your eyes? Her eyelids fluttered, opened. For a moment, she just stared at him with unfocused brown eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. You collapsed, Lucas explained, keeping his voice gentle. In the crosswalk. You're safe now. Just sit here, okay? Don't try to move yet. She blinked slowly and some of the fog seemed to clear from her gaze. She looked down at herself, then up at Lucas, then around at the street as if trying to piece together how she'd gotten there. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She had to stop and wet her lips before trying again. What happened? You fainted, or came pretty close to it. Lucas crouched down beside her, setting his fallen portfolio on the sidewalk. The leather was scuffed now. He ignored it. Do you have any medical conditions I should know about? Diabetes, heart problems? She shook her head slightly, then winced as if the movement hurt. No, I'm fine. You're not fine, Lucas said, more bluntly than he'd intended. He softened his tone. When's the last time you ate something? The question seemed to confuse her. She frowned, staring at the sidewalk like the answer might be written there. Yesterday, she finally said. Maybe. There was a breakfast meeting, but I didn't. She trailed off, and Lucas watched her struggle to organize her thoughts. What time is it? Lucas checked his phone. The screen showed 2:47 p.m. in bright white numbers, 23 minutes until his interview. His stomach dropped. It's almost 3, he said. Do you have someone I can call? Someone who can come get you? She was already shaking her head before he finished the question. No, I'm okay. I just need to... She tried to stand up, bracing one hand against the streetlight pole, but her legs immediately buckled again. Lucas caught her arm, steadying her as she sank back down. The color had drained from her face again, leaving her looking almost gray. You're not going anywhere, Lucas said firmly. Not like this. Just sit. Breathe. Give yourself a minute. I can't. There was an edge of panic in her voice now. I have to be somewhere. I have to. There's a meeting at 3:15 and I need to... You need to not pass out in the street, Lucas interrupted. He glanced around, looking for help. A pharmacy stood on the corner half a block down. Stay right here. Don't move. I'll be back in 2 minutes. He didn't wait for her to argue. Lucas grabbed his portfolio and jogged to the pharmacy, the automatic doors whooshing open to blast him with air conditioning that felt like jumping into cold water. He found the refrigerated section and grabbed 2 bottles of water and a sports drink with electrolytes. At the counter, he added a protein bar and some crackers. The total came to $12. The cashier moved with agonizing slowness, scanning each item like it was a puzzle she had to solve. Come on, Lucas muttered under his breath, checking his phone again. 20 minutes. When he finally got back outside, the woman was still sitting against the streetlight pole, but she'd drawn her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She looked smaller than she had before, like she was trying to fold into herself and disappear. Here. Lucas cracked open one of the water bottles and held it out to her. Drink, slowly. She took the bottle with both hands. He noticed they were shaking and brought it to her lips. She drank too fast, and Lucas gently pushed the bottle down. Slow, he repeated. You'll make yourself sick. She nodded and took smaller sips. Some color started to return to her face, though she still looked like she'd been running on empty for days. Lucas opened the sports drink and the protein bar, setting them beside her on the sidewalk. When you can, eat something, he said. Even just a few bites. Your blood sugar is probably in your shoes right now. She looked up at him, and for the first time she really seemed to see him. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. All those people, they just kept walking. You didn't have to stop. Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. Someone had to. But you stopped. She took another small sip of water. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. Because his mother had raised him to help people who needed helping. Because he couldn't live with himself if he just walked past and read about someone getting hit by a car later that night. Lucas could have given her any of those answers. Instead, he just said, because you needed help. She was quiet for a moment, holding the water bottle against her chest. Then, what's your name? Lucas Reed. Mia, she said. Just the first name, nothing else. Thank you, Lucas. Really, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Don't think about it, Lucas said, even though he'd been thinking about it constantly since he'd seen her stumble. She could have fallen in front of a car, could have cracked her head on the pavement, could have been seriously hurt while dozens of people just stepped over her body. You're okay now. That's what matters. Mia unwrapped the protein bar with shaking fingers and took a small bite. Lucas could practically see the food hitting her system, bringing her back from wherever she'd been. The grayish pallor started fading. Her hand steadied. She took another bite, then another, and Lucas felt something in his chest unclench. His phone buzzed. He didn't need to check it to know what it said. 18 minutes. Lucas looked up at the skyline, finding the silver rectangle of the Carter Industries building about 8 blocks away. 8 blocks? On a normal day, he could walk it in 10 minutes. But his legs felt like lead, and the heat was still pressing down on everything like a physical weight. Even if he left right now, he'd be cutting it close. And that was assuming he left right now. Mia was still eating, taking small, careful bites. Her breathing had evened out, but she was leaning heavily against the streetlight pole, like sitting upright without support was still too much. She needed to be in an emergency room, not on a sidewalk. She needed someone to take her home and make sure she actually rested instead of pushing herself until she collapsed again. Lucas checked his phone. 16 minutes. Is there anyone I can call? He asked again. Family, friends, someone from work? Mia shook her head. No one who wouldn't. She stopped, then started again. No one I want to bother. I'll be fine. I just need a few more minutes and then I can get a taxi. You need a hospital, Lucas said. Or at least a doctor. You didn't just trip, Mia. You completely collapsed. That's not normal. I know what I need, she said, and there was a flash of something sharp in her voice. Frustration, maybe, or embarrassment at being so vulnerable in front of a stranger. Then she seemed to catch herself, and her expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. It's been a really difficult week. Lucas sat down on the curb beside her, setting his portfolio between them. 15 minutes. You want to talk about it? Not really. She finished the protein bar and crumpled the wrapper, then took another long drink of water. You've already done enough. More than enough. You should probably get going. You keep checking your phone. He did need to get going. He needed to have left 5 minutes ago. But looking at Mia, still pale and shaky even with food and water in her system, Lucas couldn't bring himself to stand up. She'd said she was fine, but people who were fine didn't collapse in crosswalks. People who were fine didn't forget when they'd last eaten. People who were fine didn't have that look in their eyes, the one that said they were hanging on by their fingernails and pretending everything was okay. I have an interview, Lucas heard himself say. At 3:30, He gestured vaguely at the Carter Industries building in the distance. It's important. Mia followed his gaze, and something flickered across her face, recognition maybe, or surprise. Then you need to go, she said immediately. Lucas, seriously, I'm okay now. You've been so kind, but I don't want you to miss something important because of me. What's more important? Lucas asked. The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. But once he'd said it, he realized it was true. I mean, yeah, the interview matters. It matters a lot. But you matter too. I'm not going to leave you sitting on a sidewalk when you can barely stand up. You don't even know me. So? Mia stared at him for a long moment, and Lucas couldn't read the expression on her face. Then she looked away, blinking rapidly. That interview, she said, her voice carefully controlled. What company? Carter Industries. I know what it is. She took a breath. What position? Junior analyst, financial division. Lucas picked up his portfolio, running his thumb along the scuffed edge. It's entry level, but it's with a good company. Could turn into something real if I don't screw it up. Could turn into a career. And you're going to miss it because of me. It wasn't a question. Lucas checked his phone one more time. 13 minutes. Even if he ran, really ran, sprinted the whole way and showed up drenched in sweat and gasping for air, even then, he'd barely make it. And showing up like that, flustered and unprepared, would probably doom the interview before it started. Hiring managers didn't want desperate. They wanted confident, composed, someone who looked like they belonged in a corner office. Lucas put his phone away. There'll be other interviews. No, there won't. Mia's voice was flat, certain. Companies like Carter Industries don't give second chances. You miss your slot, you're done. They have 100 other candidates who won't miss their appointments. She wasn't wrong. Lucas knew she wasn't wrong. He'd been lucky to get the interview in the first place. 3 months of applications, hundreds of emails sent into the void, most of them never even acknowledged. The Carter Industries interview had felt like a miracle, a door opening just when he'd started to believe all the doors were locked. And now that door was closing. He could feel it swinging shut with every second that ticked past. In 10 minutes, some other candidate would be sitting in that conference room, answering the questions that were supposed to be his, making the impression he was supposed to make. Someone else would get the career he'd been working toward. "I'm sorry," Mia whispered. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault." "It's not your fault you got sick," Lucas said, "and it's not your fault I decided to help. I made that choice. I'm making it right now. But your career will still be there tomorrow." Lucas surprised himself with how much he meant it. Yeah, it hurt. Yeah, he wanted to scream at the universe for terrible timing. But looking at Mia, still trembling, still pale, still trying to apologize for nearly dying in the street, Lucas couldn't bring himself to regret stopping. Maybe he should have. Maybe that made him stupid. But he'd looked at himself in the mirror every day for 26 years, and he wanted to keep recognizing the person looking back. "You're a good person, Lucas Reed," Mia said softly. "I'm an unemployed person," Lucas corrected, but he smiled a little as he said it. "But, yeah, I try to be." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The sun had shifted slightly, shrinking their small patch of shade. Lucas could feel sweat trickling down his back, his dress shirt sticking to his skin. Around them, the city continued its relentless motion, people rushing past, cars honking, the distant wail of a siren somewhere. The world didn't stop just because your life was falling apart. Mia shifted, bracing her hand against the streetlight pole. "I think I can stand now. If you could just—" Lucas was on his feet immediately, offering his hand. She took it, and he could feel how much effort it took for her to pull herself upright. She swayed for a second, and Lucas kept his grip on her hand until he was sure she had her balance. "Okay?" he asked. "Okay," she confirmed, though her voice was still unsteady. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know how I can ever—" "You don't have to thank me," Lucas said. "Just promise me you'll see a doctor. Today. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient. Today." Mia nodded. "I promise." Lucas didn't entirely believe her, but there wasn't much else he could do. He'd helped her. He'd made sure she was safe. He couldn't force her to take care of herself beyond that. "Do you need help getting a taxi?" "I can manage." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression made Lucas feel like she was memorizing his face. "Lucas Reed, I won't forget your name or what you did today. Just take care of yourself, Mia." She nodded once more, then turned and walked slowly down the sidewalk, one hand trailing along the building wall for support. Lucas watched until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. Only then did he check his phone. 3:24 p.m., 6 minutes. For a wild second, Lucas considered running anyway. Maybe if he called ahead, explained what happened, they'd understand. They'd reschedule. They'd give him another chance. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was pointless. Mia had been right. Companies like Carter Industries didn't care about excuses. They cared about results, about people who showed up on time, ready to work, without drama or complications. Lucas picked up his portfolio and started walking. Not running, there was no point now. Just walking, putting one foot in front of the other, moving toward the building that had represented all his hopes for the future. The building that would now forever represent the opportunity he'd lost. He reached the Carter Industries Tower at 3:38 p.m., 8 minutes late. The lobby was all glass and marble and expensive-looking plants, the kind of space designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong. Lucas approached the security desk, where a man in a crisp uniform looked up with professional disinterest. "Lucas Reed," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had an interview at 3:30. I know I'm late, but if there's any chance—" The security guard was already checking his computer, typing with 2 fingers. 3:30 appointment with Ms. Patterson in Human Resources? Yes, that's the one. The guard's expression didn't change. I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. Ms. Patterson's schedule shows your interview was canceled due to a no-show. She's already moved on to her next appointment. The words landed like a physical blow. Is there any way I could reschedule? I had an emergency. Someone needed help. You'll need to contact Human Resources directly to discuss rescheduling. The guard's tone made it clear this conversation was over. Have a good day, sir. Lucas stood there for a moment, portfolio hanging useless at his side, staring at the elevators that led up to the floors where people had real jobs and real futures. Then he turned and walked back out into the heat. The subway ride home was packed with evening commuters, all of them looking as tired as Lucas felt. He stood near the doors, one hand gripping the pole, and watched the city flash past through the scratched windows. His phone buzzed twice with texts from his roommate asking how the interview went. Lucas didn't answer. His apartment was a studio in a building that had probably been nice 40 years ago. Now it was just cheap, which was all Lucas could afford. He dropped his portfolio on the kitchen counter, really just a hot plate and a mini fridge, and loosened his tie. His reflection stared back at him from the bathroom mirror. Rumpled shirt, tired eyes, the face of someone who'd just watched his best opportunity disappear. His phone rang. Unknown number. Lucas almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe to accept. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Jennifer Patterson from Carter Industries Human Resources. Lucas's heart jumped into his throat. Yes, this is Lucas Reed. Ms. Patterson, I apologize about today. I can explain. I'm calling to inform you that your interview slot has been officially terminated. We require all candidates to be punctual and professional. Missing your scheduled time, regardless of the reason, indicates a lack of those qualities. I understand, but additionally, your resume will be flagged in our system, and you will be ineligible to reapply to any Carter Industries position for the next 12 months. This is company policy. 12 months. A year of his life, locked out of one of the best employers in the city. Lucas leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. I see. Thank you for letting me know. I hope you find success elsewhere, Mr. Reed. The line went dead. Lucas set his phone down very carefully. He thought about calling someone, his mom, maybe, or one of the friends who'd been encouraging him through the job search. But what would he say? That he'd thrown away his best chance because a stranger needed help? That he'd chosen someone else's well-being over his own future? They'd probably tell him he did the right thing. They'd probably be kind about it. But kindness didn't pay rent. Doing the right thing didn't fill out his resume or put food in his refrigerator. Lucas changed out of his interview clothes and into sweatpants and a t-shirt. He made a sandwich he didn't really want and ate it standing at the counter. Outside his window, the city glittered with the lives of people who had jobs and futures and didn't make stupid choices that cost them everything. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his landlord. Rent due in 3 days. Need payment on time this month. Lucas deleted the message. He'd figure something out. He always figured something out. That's what you did when you were 26 and broke and trying to build a life out of nothing. You figured it out, or you didn't, and either way the world kept spinning. He thought about Mia, wondered if she'd made it home okay. Wondered if she'd kept her promise about seeing a doctor. Wondered if she'd even remember his name tomorrow, or if he'd just be a vague memory of kindness from a stranger on a difficult day. Lucas hoped she was okay. Despite everything, despite the lost interview and the flagged resume and the 12 months of being locked out, he hoped she was okay. Because if she wasn't, then what had any of this been for? He fell asleep with that question still hanging in the air, unanswered. 3 days turned into a week. A week turned into 2. Lucas stopped counting after that. The temp agency placed him at a warehouse on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights hummed constantly and the concrete floor made your feet ache by lunchtime. He spent his days scanning barcodes and moving boxes, work that required his body but not his mind. That was probably for the best. His mind had nowhere good to go lately. The pay was $12 an hour. After taxes, it barely covered his rent with enough left over for ramen noodles and the cheapest coffee the bodega sold. Lucas had submitted 47 job applications in the past 2 weeks. He'd received 3 automated rejections and 44 silences. The silence was worse somehow. At least rejection was an answer. On a Thursday morning that felt identical to every other morning, Lucas clocked in at the warehouse and found his supervisor waiting by the loading dock. Gary was 50-something with a beer gut and a permanent scowl. The kind of man who'd probably been disappointed by life so many times he'd forgotten what hope felt like. "Reed," Gary grunted, not looking up from his clipboard. "You're on inventory today, aisle 12 through 20. Count everything, check it against the manifest, mark any discrepancies." "Got it," Lucas said. "And Reed?" Gary finally looked at him. "Corporate's cutting hours next month, just so you know." Lucas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How many hours?" "Enough that you might want to start looking for a second job." Gary walked away before Lucas could respond, his boots echoing on the concrete. A second job. Lucas was already working 50 hours a week. When exactly was he supposed to fit in a second job? When was he supposed to sleep? When was he supposed to keep applying to positions that actually used his degree, his skills, his potential for something more than this? He grabbed a scanner and headed to aisle 12, where boxes of electronics sat stacked floor to ceiling. The work was mindless. Scan, count, check the number, move to the next box. His body went through the motions while his mind wandered to places it shouldn't go. To the interview he'd missed, to the 12-month ban from Carter Industries, to the way his future had evaporated in the time it took to help a stranger. Lucas didn't regret helping Mia. He told himself that every time the anger started creeping in. He didn't regret it. He'd do it again. But that didn't make the consequences any easier to swallow. His phone buzzed in his pocket around noon. Lucas almost ignored it. Probably just another automated rejection, another door slamming shut. But something made him check. Unknown number. He swiped to answer. "Hello? Is this Lucas Reed?" The voice was male, professional, with an edge of formality that made Lucas straighten his posture automatically. "Yes, this is Lucas. Mr. Reed, my name is David Chen. I'm calling from Carter Industries." Lucas nearly dropped the scanner. Carter Industries, the company that had banned him for a year, the company that represented everything he'd lost. "I'm sorry," Lucas said slowly. "I think there's been a mistake. I was told I couldn't reapply for 12 months. "There's no mistake, Mr. Reed. I'm not calling about a position you applied for. I'm calling to request your presence at our headquarters tomorrow at 10 a.m. You'll be meeting with our CEO, Richard Carter." The words didn't make sense. Lucas heard them individually, CEO, Richard Carter, headquarters, tomorrow, but strung together, they formed a sentence that couldn't be real. "I don't understand. Why would the CEO want to meet with me?" "Mr. Carter will explain everything tomorrow. Can I confirm your attendance?" Lucas looked around the warehouse at the endless aisles of boxes that represented his current reality. "I have work tomorrow. I'd need to request time off." "I'd strongly suggest you make that happen, Mr. Reed. This is an opportunity you don't want to miss." There was something in David Chen's voice, not quite urgency, but close. A suggestion that whatever this was, it mattered. Lucas made a decision he hoped wouldn't cost him the only job he had. "I'll be there." "Excellent. 10 a.m. sharp. Ask for me at the security desk and I'll escort you up. And Mr. Reed, dress professionally." The line went dead before Lucas could ask any more questions. He stood in aisle 12, surrounded by boxes, trying to process what had just happened. The CEO of Carter Industries wanted to meet with him. Personally. Tomorrow. It didn't make sense. CEOs didn't meet with failed interview candidates. They didn't meet with warehouse workers who'd been banned from reapplying. They definitely didn't make special requests for meetings with no explanation. Unless this was about something else. Unless Lucas had somehow screwed up worse than he thought, and this meeting was to formally tear him apart for wasting their time. Or maybe, and this thought made his stomach twist, maybe Mia had filed some kind of complaint. Maybe she'd remembered him after all, but not in a good way. Maybe she'd told someone he'd been inappropriate or aggressive, or... Lucas forced himself to stop. He was spiraling, inventing worst-case scenarios out of nothing. The only way to know what this was about was to show up tomorrow and find out. He found Gary in the break room pouring himself coffee that looked like it had been sitting in the pot since yesterday. "I need tomorrow off," Lucas said without preamble. "Morning hours. I can come in after lunch." Gary looked at him like he'd asked for $1 million. We're short-staffed as it is. It's important. Lucas hesitated. It's a job interview. A real one. The kind that could change things. Something shifted in Gary's expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition, like he remembered what it felt like to hope for something better. Fine. But you owe me a Saturday shift. Deal. That night, Lucas pulled his interview suit out of the closet. It had been dry cleaned after the Carter Industries disaster, but wearing it again felt like tempting fate. He hung it on the bathroom door and stared at it while he brushed his teeth, trying to imagine what tomorrow might bring. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind conjured new scenarios, some hopeful, most terrifying. At 3 a.m., he gave up and made coffee, sitting at his kitchen counter in the dark and watching the city lights blink through his window. Somewhere out there was Carter Industries, the building full of answers he wouldn't get until morning. The hours crawled past. Lucas showered at 6, made eggs he couldn't eat at 7, and was dressed and ready by 8. He left his apartment at 8:30, giving himself way too much time but unable to sit still any longer. Better to be early than late. Better to pace outside the building than wear a hole in his carpet at home. The subway was packed with morning commuters. Lucas stood pressed against the door, watching the stops tick past, each one bringing him closer to whatever waited at Carter Industries. His palms were sweating. He wiped them on his pants, then worried the gesture had wrinkled the fabric, then told himself to stop being ridiculous. He arrived at the Carter Industries building at 9:15, 45 minutes early. Lucas walked past it twice, trying to burn off nervous energy, before finally entering the lobby at 9:40. The same security guard from last time looked up as he approached. "Lucas Reed," Lucas said. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with David Chen." The guard checked his computer and something changed in his demeanor. His professional disinterest sharpened into attention. "Of course, Mr. Reed. Mr. Chen will be down shortly. Please have a seat." Lucas sat in one of the expensive-looking chairs near the window, his portfolio balanced on his knees. The lobby was quieter than it had been last time, just a few people moving through on their way to somewhere important. Lucas watched them and wondered if he'd ever belong in a place like this, if he'd ever move through a space this nice with the confidence of someone who earned the right to be there. At exactly 10 o'clock, a man in his 30s emerged from the elevators. He was Asian, wearing a perfectly tailored suit with glasses that probably cost more than Lucas's rent. He scanned the lobby, and his eyes landed on Lucas. "Mr. Reed?" Lucas stood quickly. "That's me." "David Chen, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, professional. "If you'll follow me, Mr. Carter is expecting you." They entered an elevator lined with mirrors. Lucas caught his reflection and tried not to look as nervous as he felt. David Chen pressed the button for the 32nd floor, the executive level, Lucas assumed. The elevator rose smoothly, silently, and Lucas's stomach dropped with each floor they passed. "Can I ask what this is about?" Lucas ventured. David glanced at him. "Mr. Carter will explain everything, but I can tell you that you're not in any trouble if that's what you're worried about." It was exactly what Lucas had been worried about, and hearing it out loud should have been a relief. Somehow it just made him more nervous. If he wasn't in trouble, then what was this? What could a CEO possibly want with him? The elevator doors opened onto a floor that looked nothing like Lucas had imagined. Yes, there was expensive carpet and art on the walls, but it also felt oddly lived in. Someone had left a coffee mug on a side table. A jacket hung over the back of a chair. This wasn't just executive space, it was workspace, where real people did real jobs that happened to come with corner offices. David led him down a hallway past several closed doors before stopping at one marked Richard Carter, Chief Executive Officer. He knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Mr. Reed is here." "Send him in," came a voice from inside. David stepped aside, gesturing for Lucas to enter. Lucas took a breath and walked through the door into an office that somehow managed to be both impressively large and surprisingly comfortable. Windows lined one wall, offering a view of the city that probably cost a fortune. The desk was solid wood, covered in neat stacks of papers, and a laptop that looked brand new. But Lucas barely noticed any of that because sitting in the chairs in front of the desk were two people. One was a man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, wearing a suit that had definitely been custom made. The other was Mia. Lucas stopped walking, stopped breathing, just stopped, staring at the woman he'd helped on the sidewalk 3 weeks ago. She looked different now, healthy color in her cheeks, hair pulled back neatly, wearing a professional dress instead of the rumpled blazer she'd had on that day. But it was definitely her. Same brown eyes, same slight build, same face that had been pale and sweating when he'd caught her in the crosswalk. "Lucas," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. "Thank you for coming." "I don't—" Lucas looked between Mia and the silver-haired man, trying to piece together what was happening. "I don't understand. What are you doing here?" The older man stood, extending his hand. "Lucas Reed, I'm Richard Carter, and you've already met my daughter, Mia." His daughter. The CEO's daughter. Lucas's hand moved automatically to shake Richard's, but his brain was still several steps behind. Mia was Richard Carter's daughter. He'd helped the CEO's daughter. The woman who'd collapsed in the crosswalk, who'd been too weak to stand, who'd apologized for making him miss his interview. She was Mia Carter. "Please sit," Richard said, gesturing to the empty chair beside Mia. Lucas sat because his legs had forgotten how to hold him up. His portfolio slipped from his hand and landed on the floor. He didn't pick it up. "I think you owe Lucas an explanation," Mia said, looking at her father. Richard nodded. 3 weeks ago, my daughter was found collapsed on 5th Street by a young man who stopped to help her. That young man stayed with her, made sure she was safe, and missed an important job interview in the process. An interview here at this company. Are you following so far, Mr. Reed? Lucas nodded numbly. His mouth had gone dry. What you didn't know, what Mia didn't tell you, was that she had collapsed due to exhaustion and malnutrition brought on by several weeks of extreme stress. We were in the middle of a corporate crisis, a data breach that threatened to expose sensitive client information. Mia is our chief technology officer. Richard's expression tightened. She's also someone who doesn't know how to stop working, even when her body is shutting down. Dad, Mia said quietly, but Richard held up a hand. It's true, and you know it. You were running on 3 hours of sleep and coffee, skipping meals, pushing yourself past any reasonable limit. And when you finally collapsed, dozens of people walked past you. Dozens, Mia. But one person stopped. One person chose to help, even knowing what it would cost him. Lucas found his voice. She needed help. Yes, she did, Richard agreed, and you gave it. After Mia told me what happened, after she described the man who'd stayed with her and made sure she was safe, I had my head of security pull footage from the intersection cameras. I watched you, Mr. Reed. I watched you drop everything and run to catch my daughter before she fell. I watched you buy her water and food with your own money. I watched you sit with her on that sidewalk for 23 minutes while your interview window closed. Lucas's face burned. He hadn't known there were cameras, hadn't thought about being watched. He'd just done what needed to be done. I had David Chen pull your application file, Richard continued. Bachelor's degree in finance from a good school, solid grades, 3 months of unemployment through no fault of your own, your previous company downsized, 47 job applications in the past 2 weeks alone. You're qualified, hardworking, and clearly desperate for an opportunity. Richard leaned forward. And yet when you saw someone in trouble, you chose to help. Why? I already told Mia why, Lucas said, because it was the right thing to do. Even knowing what it would cost you? Especially knowing what it would cost me, Lucas said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. If I'd walked past her, if I'd put that interview ahead of someone's safety, then I wouldn't deserve the job anyway. What kind of person does that make me? What kind of person sees someone collapse and just keeps walking because they've got somewhere to be? Richard exchanged a glance with Mia. Something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or confirmation of something already discussed. Mr. Reed, Richard said, I've spent 40 years building this company. I've hired thousands of people. And I can tell you that skills can be taught. Experience can be gained. Intelligence can be developed. But character? He shook his head. Character is something you either have or you don't. It's something that shows up when no one's watching, when there's no reward for doing the right thing, when it actually costs you something. I don't understand what you want from me, Lucas said. I want to offer you a position, Richard said simply. Not the junior analyst role you interviewed for. That would have been entry-level, basic work, a starting point. I'm offering you something better. A position in our strategic development division, working directly with senior management on projects that matter. It comes with a competitive salary, full benefits, and training opportunities that will set you up for real advancement. Lucas stared at him. The words were English. He understood each one individually, but together they formed a sentence that couldn't possibly be real. You're offering me a job? Yes. Because I helped your daughter. Because you showed me who you are when it matters most, Richard corrected. Because in a city full of people who didn't care, you cared. Because you made a choice that cost you something, and you didn't regret it. Those are the people I want working here, Mr. Reed. The ones who understand that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you are when you're achieving it. Lucas looked at Mia. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Did you know? He asked her. That day on the sidewalk, did you know who I was? That I had an interview here? Not at first, Mia said. But when you told me about it, yes. I recognized the building. I knew where you were supposed to be, and I tried to tell you to go, remember? I told you not to miss something important because of me. But you didn't tell me who you were. Would it have changed anything if I had? Mia asked. Would you have helped me more or less if you'd known I was the CEO's daughter? Lucas thought about it, honestly thought about it. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I would have acted different. Maybe I would have second-guessed myself more, wondering if you were testing me or something. Exactly, Mia said. I didn't want that. I needed someone to just see me as a person who needed help, not as Richard Carter's daughter, not as the CTO of a major company, just as someone who was struggling and scared and about to pass out in the middle of traffic. I had David Chen call you personally, Richard added. I wanted you to come here without knowing why. I wanted to see if you'd show up, if you'd take the chance on something uncertain. And you did. Of course I did, Lucas said. You didn't give me a choice. Your assistant said it was important. Everything's a choice, Mr. Reed. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. You could have said no. You could have decided this was some kind of trap, or that it wasn't worth the risk. But you showed up, just like you showed up for Mia when she needed someone. That's consistency. That's character. Lucas's head was spinning. 3 weeks ago, he'd lost everything. He'd watched his future disappear while he sat on a sidewalk with a stranger. He'd gone home to his studio apartment and eaten a sandwich he couldn't taste, wondering if doing the right thing was worth it when the cost was so high. And now that stranger's father was offering him not just a job, but a career. Not just an opportunity, but a future. I don't know what to say, Lucas admitted. Say yes, Mia said. She leaned forward, and for the first time since he'd walked into this office, she smiled. Say yes, Lucas. You earned this. Not because you helped me, although I'll never forget that, but because you're exactly the kind of person we need here. The kind who does what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. What about the ban? Lucas asked. Your HR department flagged my resume. I can't reapply for 12 months. That's been handled, Richard said. Jennifer Patterson has been informed that the ban was lifted by executive order. Your file has been cleared. And if you accept this position, you'll start on Monday. Monday. 4 days from now. Lucas would walk into this building not as a failed candidate, not as someone who'd wasted their chance, but as an employee. Someone who belonged here. Someone with a future that didn't involve counting boxes in a warehouse or wondering how to afford next month's rent. There's no catch? Lucas asked, because this felt too good to be true. You're really just offering me this job? There's always a catch, Mr. Reed, Richard said, but his voice was kind. The catch is that you'll be expected to work hard. You'll be challenged. You'll be thrown into situations where you'll need to prove yourself every single day. This isn't a free ride. It's an opportunity, and what you make of it is up to you. I can work hard, Lucas said. I've been working hard my whole life. I know you have. Richard returned to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder. This is your employment contract. Take it home. Read it carefully. If you have questions, call David Chen. His number's in there. If you decide to accept, sign it and bring it back Monday morning. You'll start with orientation at 8 a.m. Lucas took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. The weight of it felt significant, like he was holding more than just paper. He was holding possibility. Hope. A second chance that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. "Thank you," Lucas said, looking at Richard, then at Mia. "Both of you, I can't. You don't have to thank us," Mia said gently. "You already did more for me than I can repay. This is just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "This is just making sure that doing the right thing doesn't mean losing everything. That's all." Lucas stood, clutching the folder against his chest. David Chen appeared in the doorway, ready to escort him out, but Lucas hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Mia. "That day you said you had a meeting at 3:15. Did you make it?" Mia shook her head. "No, I didn't make it, but that turned out to be exactly what I needed. Missing that meeting, collapsing on that street, having you force me to slow down and breathe, it made me realize I'd been pushing too hard, trying to fix everything myself instead of asking for help. I spent 3 days in the hospital after you left me on that corner. Dehydration, exhaustion, stress-induced arrhythmia. The doctor said if I'd kept going the way I was, I might have had a heart attack before I turned 30. You promised you'd see a doctor," Lucas said. "I kept that promise," Mia said. "About an hour after we said goodbye, I collapsed again. A real collapse this time, unconscious before I hit the ground. Someone called an ambulance, and while I was lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to IVs and monitors, all I could think about was you, about how you'd stopped, how you'd helped, how you'd lost something important because of me. I couldn't let that stand. I had to find you, had to make sure you were okay, had to make this right somehow." "You didn't have to do any of this," Lucas said. "Yes, I did," Mia said firmly. "Because you taught me something that day, Lucas. You taught me that there are still people in this world who care about strangers, who put humanity ahead of ambition, who understand that we're all in this together, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is just stop and help someone who needs it. That's not a small thing. That's everything." Lucas felt something tight in his chest loosen. For 3 weeks, he'd been carrying the weight of that decision, wondering if he'd been stupid to sacrifice so much for someone he didn't know, wondering if the cost had been worth it. But looking at Mia now, healthy, alive, with color in her cheeks and strength in her voice, Lucas knew the answer. It had been worth it, every second of it. "I'll see you Monday," Lucas said. Richard stood and extended his hand again. "Welcome to Carter Industries, Mr. Reed. I have a feeling you're going to do great things here." David Chen led Lucas back to the elevator, through the lobby, and out onto the street where everything had changed 3 weeks ago. The sun was bright overhead, the city humming with its usual chaos, but somehow everything looked different, better. Like Lucas was seeing it through new eyes. He walked to the subway in a daze, the employment contract folder tucked safely under his arm. On the train ride home, he opened it and started reading. The salary made his eyes water. It was more than double what he'd been making at the warehouse. More than he'd ever made in his life. Enough to pay rent on time, to buy groceries without counting every dollar, to start saving for a future that suddenly seemed possible. The benefits package included health insurance, dental, vision, a retirement plan with company matching, 3 weeks of paid vacation, and tuition reimbursement if he wanted to pursue a graduate degree. Lucas read each line twice, making sure he wasn't misunderstanding that this was really happening. At the bottom of the contract was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Sometimes the right door opens because you stop to help someone find theirs. Thank you for being you. Mia." Lucas folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, where it would stay for the rest of his career. A reminder that kindness mattered, that character counted, that doing the right thing might cost you something in the moment, but it could also change everything. His phone buzzed, a text from his roommate. "Dude, where are you? Landlord's been by twice asking about rent." Lucas smiled and typed back, "On my way home, and I have good news, really good news." He called Gary from the subway platform, the warehouse manager who'd given him a chance when no one else would. "Gary, it's Lucas. I need to let you know I won't be coming back. I got a job offer, a real one, starting Monday." There was a pause, then, "Good for you, kid. Go make something of yourself. Thanks for taking a chance on me, Lucas said. I won't forget it. Just remember us warehouse guys when you're sitting in your corner office, Gary said gruffly. Then he hung up before Lucas could respond. Lucas emerged from the subway into his neighborhood, where the buildings were old and the streets were crowded and nothing had changed in the 3 weeks since his life had fallen apart. Except everything had changed. He was different. The world was different. Or maybe it had always been this way, and he was only just now seeing it clearly. He thought about the dozens of people who'd walked past Mia that day. People with their own lives, their own problems, their own reasons for not stopping. He didn't judge them. He understood. It was easier to keep walking, safer to mind your own business, less complicated to assume someone else would help. But he'd stopped, and that single decision had somehow led him here, to this moment, walking home with a job offer that would change everything. Not because he'd calculated the odds or expected a reward, but because when he'd seen someone who needed help, he couldn't walk past. It was just who he was. Lucas reached his apartment building and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his studio. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. The unmade bed, the dishes in the sink, the stack of rejection letters on the counter. But tomorrow he'd start cleaning this place up. Tomorrow he'd go buy real groceries. Tomorrow he'd call his mother and tell her that things were finally looking up. Tonight, though, he just sat on his bed and held the employment contract, reading it again and again, making absolutely sure it was real, that this was his life now, that he'd survived the hard part and come out the other side into something better. His phone rang. Unknown number again. Lucas answered without hesitation. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is David Chen again. I apologize for calling after hours, but Mr. Carter wanted me to remind you about Monday, 8 a.m. sharp. Ask for me at security, and I'll take you to HR for orientation. And Mr. Reed, congratulations. Sincerely. Thank you, Lucas said. I'll be there. He ended the call and set his phone aside. Monday felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. He had 4 days to prepare for a job he'd never expected to get, in a division he'd never heard of, working on projects he couldn't even imagine yet. 4 days to become someone who deserved this opportunity. But he'd figure it out, just like he always did. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of doing what was right even when it was hard. Lucas looked around his tiny apartment, at the life he'd been living for the past 3 months. It had been difficult. It had been lonely. It had tested him in ways he hadn't expected. But it had also shown him who he was when everything else was stripped away. And that person, the one who stopped to help a stranger, who chose compassion over ambition, who understood that some things mattered more than success, that person was someone he could be proud of. On Monday, he'd walk into Carter Industries as an employee. But tonight, he was just Lucas Reed, 26 years old, sitting in his studio apartment, holding a contract that proved the universe sometimes noticed when you did the right thing. It didn't always pay off. It didn't always work out. But sometimes, just sometimes, kindness came back around in ways you never expected. And that was enough to keep believing in it. That was enough to keep being the person who stopped. Lucas spent the weekend in a state of controlled anxiety. He cleaned his apartment until it gleamed, bought a week's worth of groceries without checking prices, and ironed his interview suit 3 times because he kept finding wrinkles that probably weren't there. Sunday night, he set 4 alarms on his phone, then lay awake watching the ceiling fan spin in lazy circles, wondering if he'd be able to sleep at all. He must have slept eventually because the first alarm jolted him awake at 5:30 Monday morning. Lucas showered in water as hot as he could stand, shaved twice to make sure he didn't miss anything, and put on his suit with hands that trembled slightly as he knotted his tie. In the mirror, he looked like someone who belonged in an office building. He hoped that would be enough. The subway was crowded with other early commuters, all of them wearing the same expression of resigned determination. Lucas stood near the doors, watching the stops tick past, each one bringing him closer to a future that still felt too good to be real. Part of him expected to walk into Carter Industries and find out this had all been some elaborate mistake, that they'd confused him with someone else, someone more qualified, someone who actually deserved this chance. He arrived at the building at 7:30. 30 minutes early, but Lucas couldn't bring himself to wait any longer. The security guard from his previous visits looked up as he approached, and this time there was recognition in his eyes. "Mr. Reed," the guard said, actually smiling. "Mr. Chen said to send you straight up when you arrived. 32nd floor. He's expecting you." Lucas rode the elevator alone, watching the floor numbers climb. His reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls, and he tried to project more confidence than he felt. The doors opened onto the executive floor, and David Chen was already waiting in the hallway. "Right on time," David said, extending his hand. "Actually, you're early. That's good. Shows you're serious about this." He gestured for Lucas to follow him, but instead of heading toward Richard Carter's office, they went in the opposite direction. "Orientation starts in HR, but Mr. Carter wanted to see you first. Just for a moment." They stopped at the same office door from Friday. David knocked once and opened it without waiting for a response. Richard Carter was sitting at his desk, reading something on his laptop, but he looked up immediately when they entered. "Lucas," Richard said, standing. "Good morning. I won't keep you long. I know you have orientation, but I wanted to see you before you started. How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Lucas admitted. "Excited, grateful. All of those things at once." Richard smiled. "That's exactly how you should feel. The day you stop feeling that way is the day you've gotten too comfortable." He walked around his desk and leaned against it, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "I want to be very clear about something, Lucas. You're starting today because you earned this position, not because you helped Mia, that's what got you noticed, but because your qualifications, your work ethic, and your character make you exactly the kind of person we need here. Do you understand the distinction?" "I think so," Lucas said. "You're saying I still have to prove myself." "Everyone has to prove themselves," Richard corrected. "Every single day. I've been CEO of this company for 15 years, and I still have to prove I deserve this position. The moment you stop proving yourself is the moment you start failing. But here's the thing." Richard's expression softened slightly. "I already know you can do this. I've seen what you're made of. I've watched you make difficult choices under pressure. Now I just want to see what you can do when you're given the right opportunities and resources." Lucas felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't, but more importantly, don't let yourself down. This is your career, Lucas, your future. I'm just providing the door. What you do once you walk through it is entirely up to you." David Chen cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Carter, Lucas's orientation starts in 10 minutes. "Of course." Richard extended his hand and Lucas shook it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. "Welcome to Carter Industries, Mr. Reed. I'll be keeping an eye on your progress. Make it interesting." David led Lucas back to the elevator and down to the 20th floor, where the Human Resources Department occupied a suite of offices that somehow managed to be both professional and welcoming. A woman in her 40s with short red hair and a warm smile greeted them at the reception desk. "You must be Lucas Reed," she said, coming around the desk with her hand extended. "I'm Patricia Morrison, Director of HR. It's wonderful to meet you. Mr. Carter speaks very highly of you." Lucas shook her hand, still getting used to the idea that the CEO of this company knew his name. "Thank you for having me." "Oh, we're thrilled to have you. Come on back. We've got a full morning of paperwork and presentations ahead of you, but I promise we'll try to make it as painless as possible." David Chen excused himself, and Patricia led Lucas into a conference room where two other new hires were already sitting. A young woman about Lucas's age with dark skin and neat braids introduced herself as Jasmine Torres, starting in the marketing department. The other was an older man named Robert Chen, no relation to David apparently, who'd be working in operations. They all shook hands with the awkward formality of people who didn't know each other yet but would probably become familiar faces in the elevator. The morning was a blur of presentations, employee handbook policies, benefits enrollment forms, IT security protocols, sexual harassment prevention training, insurance options, retirement plan selections. Lucas's head spun with information, and he filled out so many forms his hands started cramping. But underneath the tedium was a current of excitement he couldn't suppress. He was doing this. He was actually here, filling out these forms, learning these policies, becoming part of something bigger than himself. During a mid-morning break, Jasmine cornered him by the coffee station. "So," she said, pouring herself a cup, "rumor has it you got hired directly by the CEO. Is that true?" Lucas hesitated. He didn't know what he was supposed to say, what was appropriate to share. It's complicated. Everything about this place seems complicated, Jasmine said, but she was smiling. I applied 6 months ago. Did 3 rounds of interviews, thought I'd never hear back. Then last week I got the call. What about you? Something like that, Lucas said vaguely. How'd you hear about the CEO thing? Jasmine lowered her voice. Robert said he overheard Patricia talking to someone in the hall, said you were a special hire, brought in at Richard Carter's personal request. That's not exactly standard procedure. I guess not, Lucas admitted. But I'm here to work, same as you, same as everyone else. Sure, Jasmine said, but her eyes were curious. Just seems like there's a story there. There was a story. A whole story about crosswalks and collapsed strangers and choosing compassion over ambition, but it wasn't Lucas's story to tell. Maybe someday I'll tell you about it, he said, but right now I think Patricia's calling us back in. The afternoon brought tours of the building. Patricia walked them through the main floors, pointing out the cafeteria, the gym, the outdoor terrace on the 15th floor where people ate lunch on nice days. She showed them the various departments, explaining what each one did and how they all fit together to make Carter Industries function. The company was bigger than Lucas had realized. Over 2,000 employees across multiple divisions, all working on projects he was only beginning to understand. They ended the tour on the 28th floor, where the Strategic Development Division occupied a suite of offices with glass walls and collaborative workspaces. This was where Lucas would be working. Patricia introduced him to his immediate supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Elizabeth Park, who had sharp eyes and a firm handshake. Lucas Reed, Elizabeth said, looking him over with an assessing gaze. I've heard interesting things about you. All good, I hope, Lucas said. All intriguing, Elizabeth corrected. Richard doesn't often make direct hiring requests, especially for new graduates. That tells me you're either exceptional or you impressed him somehow. Probably both. She gestured for him to follow her into the office space. Strategic development is where we work on long-term planning, market analysis, growth opportunities, and competitive strategy. It's challenging work, requires you to think several steps ahead, to see patterns others miss, to connect dots that don't seem related. Think you can handle that? I'd like to try, Lucas said. Elizabeth smiled slightly. Good answer. Confidence is important, but so is humility. The people who fail here are the ones who think they already know everything. She stopped at a desk near the windows, a real desk, with a computer and a phone and a view of the city. This is yours. Your login credentials are in this envelope. It will get you set up tomorrow morning, but for today, I just want you to observe. Sit in on a few meetings. Get a feel for how we operate. Ask questions when you have them. Don't pretend to understand something if you don't. We'd rather train you correctly than have you develop bad habits. Clear? Crystal clear, Lucas said. Welcome to the team. Elizabeth handed him the envelope and walked away, already pulling out her phone to handle the next thing on her list. Lucas sat down at his desk, and let the reality of the moment wash over him. 3 weeks ago, he'd been counting boxes in a warehouse, wondering how he'd pay next month's rent. Now he was sitting in an office with a view, about to start a career that could actually lead somewhere. The universe had a strange sense of timing. His computer monitor was dark, waiting for his login credentials. Lucas opened the envelope and found a welcome letter, his username and temporary password, and a schedule for his first week. Tomorrow he had meetings with IT, a one-on-one with Elizabeth, and something called Strategic Planning 101 that apparently lasted 4 hours. The week was packed with training sessions, introductory meetings, and shadowing opportunities. They weren't wasting any time getting him up to speed. First day? Someone asked. Lucas looked up to find a man about his age standing by his desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. He had an easy smile and wore his tie loose, like he'd been at work long enough to stop caring about perfect presentation. That obvious? Lucas asked. You've got the deer in headlights look. We all had it. I'm Marcus Webb. I've been here about a year. He set one of the coffee cups on Lucas's desk. Figured you could use this. Patricia's tours are thorough but exhausting. Lucas Reed, and thank you. Lucas took a sip. It was good coffee, much better than the bodega stuff he'd been drinking for months. What do you work on? Market analysis mostly. looking at trends, trying to predict where industries are heading, figuring out where Carter Industries should position itself. It's interesting work once you get past the learning curve, which is steep, by the way. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. How steep are we talking? Marcus laughed. Put it this way, I spent my first month feeling like everyone was speaking a different language. Then one day it just clicked, and suddenly I understood what they were all talking about. You'll get there. Just takes time and patience and asking a lot of questions. He gestured toward the window. Nice desk placement, though. Elizabeth doesn't usually put new people by the windows. You must have made an impression. Something like that, Lucas said, echoing his earlier conversation with Jasmine. Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. And if you need anything, questions about the work, where to find good lunch spots, how to navigate office politics, I'm at the desk 2 rows back. Come find me anytime. Marcus left, and Lucas sat alone at his desk, sipping coffee and watching the city through the window. From this high up, everything looked small and manageable. The streets where he'd walked, desperate for opportunities that never came. The subway stops where he'd stood watching his savings dwindle. The intersection where he'd made the choice that had somehow led him here. He couldn't see that intersection from this window. It was too far away, lost among the thousands of other streets that made up the city's grid. But Lucas knew exactly where it was. He could probably draw a map from memory. The exact spot where Mia had stumbled, the curb where he'd caught her, the narrow strip of shade where they'd sat while his future was supposed to be happening 8 blocks away. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How's the first day going? Call me when you get a chance. I want to hear everything. Lucas smiled and typed back. So far, so good. I'll call tonight. Love you. He'd called her Saturday night, right after reading the contract for the 10th time. She'd cried, happy tears, proud tears, the kind of tears mothers cry when they see their children finally catching a break. She'd told him she always knew he'd do something great, that she'd never doubted him, even when he'd doubted himself. Lucas had tried not to cry along with her, but he'd failed at that too. The afternoon brought meetings. Elizabeth had him sit in on a strategic planning session where people threw around terms like market penetration and vertical integration with the ease of people who'd been doing this for years. Lucas understood maybe half of what was being discussed, but he took notes furiously, writing down questions to research later. No one seemed to mind that he wasn't contributing. They just accepted his presence, occasionally throwing him a small smile or a nod of acknowledgement. During a break, an older woman named Susan pulled him aside. Don't worry if you're feeling overwhelmed, she said kindly. We've all been where you are. Give yourself grace. Learning this job is like learning a new language. At first it sounds like noise, but eventually you'll start picking out words, then phrases, then full conversations. Just keep showing up and paying attention. Thank you, Lucas said. That helps. And Lucas? Susan smiled. I don't know what you did to impress Richard Carter, but whatever it was, it must have been something special. He doesn't bring people in like this unless he sees something worth investing in. So trust that. Trust that you belong here. The words settled over him like a blanket. You belong here. Lucas had spent so much of his life feeling like he was on the outside looking in, like success was something that happened to other people. People with better connections or richer families or luckier breaks. But maybe belonging wasn't about where you came from. Maybe it was about what you did when opportunity finally arrived. At 5 o'clock, people started packing up their desks. Lucas hadn't realized it was quitting time until he saw Marcus stand and stretch, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. You coming? Marcus asked. A few of us usually grab drinks on Mondays. Nothing fancy, just a place down the street. Good way to decompress after the work week starts. Lucas hesitated. Part of him wanted to go home, to process everything that had happened today, to sit alone with the reality of his new life. But another part, the part that understood networking mattered, that building relationships with coworkers was just as important as doing good work, knew he should go. Sure, Lucas said. Let me grab my things. He followed Marcus and 3 other coworkers to a bar 2 blocks from the office, the kind of place with dark wood and dim lighting and a bartender who knew everyone's usual order. They claimed a table in the back, and Lucas found himself sandwiched between Marcus and a woman named Alicia, who worked in client relations. So, Alicia said, once everyone had drinks, tell us about yourself, Lucas. Where'd you come from? What's your story? Lucas gave them the abbreviated version: college, previous job, downsizing, months of unemployment, the opportunity at Carter Industries. He left out the parts about Mia, about the crosswalk, about the choice that had cost him everything before giving him more than he'd ever expected. Those details felt private, sacred somehow. A story he wasn't ready to share with people who were still strangers. 3 months unemployed, Alicia said sympathetically. That's rough. I was out of work for 6 months after my last company went under. Thought I'd never find anything. Then Carter Industries called, and suddenly everything changed. Seems like a lot of us have similar stories, Marcus added. Like this company has a thing for taking chances on people who've been knocked down. Richard Carter's philosophy, I guess. He'd rather hire someone who's struggled and persevered than someone who's had everything handed to them. Does he really handpick employees? Lucas asked. Or is that just a rumor? Oh, it's real, said Thomas, a quiet man who'd barely spoken until now. He doesn't do it often, but when he sees someone special, he makes it happen. I heard about a woman in finance who sent him a handwritten letter explaining why she wanted to work here. Most CEOs would never see that letter. It'd get filtered by assistants. But somehow Richard read it, was impressed, and brought her in for an interview personally. What happened to her? Lucas asked. She's now the director of her department, Thomas said. That was 5 years ago. Lucas absorbed this information, trying to fit it into his understanding of Richard Carter. The man who'd watched security footage of Lucas helping his daughter, who'd pulled his application file and studied his background, who'd offered him not just a job, but a career, a future, a chance to prove himself worth the investment. The conversation flowed around him: office gossip, complaints about workload, speculation about upcoming projects. Lucas half-listened, nursing his beer, watching his new coworkers joke and laugh with the ease of people who'd known each other for months or years. He wondered how long it would take before he felt that comfortable, before he could show up at this bar and know what everyone's usual order was, before he became part of the fabric of this place, instead of a new thread still being woven in. They stayed for 2 hours. By the time Lucas said his goodbyes and headed for the subway, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the city look almost beautiful. He rode home in comfortable silence, no longer anxious, just tired in a good way. The kind of tired that came from a full day of meaningful work instead of mindless tasks. His apartment felt different when he walked in. Smaller maybe, but also more like a temporary stop instead of a permanent destination. Lucas could already imagine moving to a better place. Nothing fancy, just somewhere with a separate bedroom and windows that didn't rattle when the wind blew. Somewhere that felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep between shifts. He called his mother as promised, and she asked him 1,000 questions about his first day. What was his office like? Were his coworkers nice? Did he eat lunch? Was the CEO as intimidating in person as he seemed on TV? Lucas answered everything patiently, painting a picture of his day in words she could visualize. When they finally said goodbye, she made him promise to call again on Wednesday. Lucas heated up leftovers for dinner and sat on his bed, laptop balanced on his knees, researching terms he'd heard in today's meetings. Market penetration, vertical integration, strategic positioning. He read articles and watched videos until his eyes started to blur, determined to show up tomorrow less lost than he'd been today. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Mia Carter. Lucas's finger hovered over the screen for a moment before he opened it. The message was short. I heard today was your first day. I hope it went well. You deserve every good thing that comes your way. Remember, you earned this. Asem. He read it 3 times, then typed a response. Thank you. And thank you again for everything. I won't waste this opportunity. Her reply came almost immediately. I know you won't. That's why we hired you. Lucas set his phone aside and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd wake up and do it all again. He'd sit through more meetings, ask more questions, slowly build the knowledge and skills he'd need to succeed here. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Lucas felt like he was moving in the right direction. Like the trajectory of his life had shifted from surviving to thriving, from struggling to succeeding, from barely getting by to actually building something. All because he'd stopped in a crosswalk and helped a stranger. No, that wasn't quite right. The opportunity had come from helping Mia, but the job itself was something he'd have to earn every single day. Richard Carter had given him the door. What Lucas did once he walked through it would determine everything else. He fell asleep thinking about tomorrow, about the meetings on his schedule and the work waiting to be learned, about proving himself to Elizabeth and his team, about becoming someone who deserved the chance he'd been given, about being the kind of person who stopped when someone needed help, yes, but also the kind of person who worked hard and showed up and did whatever it took to turn opportunity into success. That person could do this. That person could build a career here. That person could become someone his mother was proud of, someone he was proud of, someone who looked back on this moment and recognized it as the beginning of something real. Lucas Reed was that person. He'd proven it on a sidewalk 3 weeks ago. Now he just had to keep proving it, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of showing up and doing the work even when it was hard. He could do that. He would do that. And tomorrow, when his alarm went off at 5:30, he'd wake up and start all over again. Because that's what you did when you were given a second chance. You didn't waste it. You honored it. You earned it every single day. Lucas closed his eyes and let sleep take him, ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed blurred together in a pattern of early mornings and late nights, of meetings that stretched his understanding and projects that pushed him beyond what he thought he was capable of. Lucas absorbed information like a sponge, staying late to read through case studies and market reports, arriving early to review his notes before the day's meetings began. The learning curve Marcus had warned him about was real, but Lucas was determined to flatten it through sheer effort. By the end of his third week, Elizabeth called him into her office. Lucas went with his stomach tight, unsure if he was about to be praised or corrected. Elizabeth gestured to the chair across from her desk, and Lucas sat, trying to read her expression. "You've been here almost a month," Elizabeth said, folding her hands on her desk. "I wanted to check in, see how you're adjusting, give you some feedback." "I appreciate that," Lucas said carefully. "You're doing well," Elizabeth said, and Lucas felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Better than well, actually. You ask good questions. You listen more than you talk, which is rare in someone your age. You're not afraid to admit when you don't understand something. Those are all valuable qualities." "Thank you," Lucas said. "But," Elizabeth continued, and the tension returned, "you're also working too hard. I see you here at 6:30 in the morning. I see your office light on when I leave at 7 at night. Marcus tells me you're skipping lunch to read through reports. That's not sustainable, Lucas." "I'm just trying to catch up," Lucas said. "Everyone else has months or years of experience. I need to—" "You need to pace yourself," Elizabeth interrupted firmly. "This is a marathon, not a sprint. Burning yourself out in the first month helps no one, especially not you. We hired you because we saw potential, but potential needs time to develop. You can't rush it." And Lucas wanted to argue, to explain that he couldn't afford to be average, that he needed to prove he deserved this opportunity every single day. But looking at Elizabeth's expression, concerned, almost maternal, he realized she wasn't criticizing him. She was trying to protect him, maybe from himself. "I'll try to find better balance," Lucas said. "Don't try. Do it." Elizabeth's voice softened. "I know you feel like you have something to prove. Everyone who starts here feels that way. But the people who last, who build real careers here, are the ones who understand this is a long game. Take care of yourself, get enough sleep, eat actual meals, have a life outside these walls." "That's not optional advice, Lucas. That's a requirement." "Understood," Lucas said. And he meant it. "Good. Now, speaking of requirements," Elizabeth pulled a folder from her desk. "There's a project I want you on. It's a big one. We're analyzing a potential acquisition target, a tech company that could expand our capabilities in data analytics. The team lead is Mia Carter." Lucas's heart skipped. He hadn't seen Mia since that first day in Richard's office. She worked on a different floor, in the technology division, and their paths simply hadn't crossed in the normal course of business. Part of him had wondered if she was avoiding him, or if he should be avoiding her, uncertain about the strange dynamic between them. "Mia specifically requested you for her team," Elizabeth continued, watching Lucas's reaction. "She said she wanted fresh eyes on the project, someone who could look at the data without preconceptions. I agreed. You'll start Monday. The project timeline is aggressive, 8 weeks to complete a full analysis and present recommendations to the board. It's a lot of pressure, but it's also a huge opportunity." Most new hires don't get staffed on board-level projects in their first month. I won't let you down, Lucas said automatically. I know you won't. But remember what we just talked about. Work hard, yes, but work smart. Don't sacrifice your health for a deadline. We need you at your best, not your most exhausted. Lucas left Elizabeth's office with the folder tucked under his arm, his mind already racing ahead to Monday, working with Mia. He'd known their paths would cross eventually. Carter Industries wasn't that big, and they clearly moved in overlapping circles, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon, hadn't expected to be specifically requested for her team. He spent the weekend reading through the preliminary materials Elizabeth had given him. The target company was called DataCore Systems, a mid-sized firm that specialized in predictive analytics and machine learning. On paper, they looked solid, growing revenue, innovative technology, strong client base. But Lucas knew that acquisitions were never simple. There were always complications, hidden risks, cultural incompatibilities that didn't show up on balance sheets. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that turned the subway platform into a humid, miserable waiting room. Lucas showed up to work with his suit jacket damp and his hair slightly wild from the wind. He'd barely set his bag down at his desk when Marcus appeared, grinning. "Heard you got assigned to the DataCore project," Marcus said. "That's major, man. Most people don't get on board presentations until they've been here at least 6 months." "Elizabeth seems to think I'm ready," Lucas said, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Well, Mia Carter doesn't request people unless she trusts them. And she's notoriously picky about her team, so whatever impression you made on her, it must have been good." Lucas thought about Mia sitting on a sidewalk, pale and shaking, drinking water he'd bought with money he couldn't really afford to spend. The impression he'd made hadn't been professional. It had been human. Maybe that was enough. The project team met at 9 in a conference room on the 26th floor. When Lucas arrived, 5 people were already seated around the table, laptops open, coffee cups steaming. Mia sat at the head of the table, looking every inch the chief technology officer in a sharp blazer and glasses Lucas had never seen her wear before. She glanced up when he entered, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of shared history. "Everyone, this is Lucas Reed from Strategic Development," Mia said as Lucas took a seat. He's new to Carter Industries, but Elizabeth Park speaks highly of his analytical skills. "Lucas, let me introduce the team." She went around the table. James from Finance, Rachel from Legal, VJ from IT, Sarah from Operations, and Daniel from Corporate Strategy, who appeared to be Mia's second-in-command on this project. They all nodded at Lucas with varying degrees of interest, sizing him up the way people do when someone new joins their team. "Let's dive in," Mia said, pulling up a presentation on the screen at the front of the room. "DataCore Systems has been on our radar for 18 months. They've developed proprietary algorithms that could significantly enhance our data analysis capabilities, particularly in predictive modeling. The preliminary financials look strong, but we need to dig deeper before we can recommend this acquisition to the board." For the next 2 hours, Mia walked them through everything they knew about DataCore: their technology, their leadership team, their client contracts, their growth trajectory. Lucas took notes furiously, occasionally jotting down questions in the margins. Mia was sharp, focused, asking pointed questions that revealed potential weaknesses others might have missed. This was a different person from the woman he'd helped on the sidewalk. This Mia was commanding, confident, someone who'd clearly earned her position through brilliance and hard work. "Lucas," Mia said suddenly, and he looked up from his notes. "You've been quiet. What are your initial thoughts?" Everyone turned to look at him. Lucas felt the weight of their attention, the expectation that he'd have something valuable to contribute despite being the newest, least experienced person in the room. He glanced down at his notes, at the question he'd written 20 minutes ago but hadn't voiced yet. "The client retention numbers look good on the surface," Lucas said slowly. 92% year over year. "But I'm wondering about the composition of that client base. Are those 92% small clients or large ones? Because if DataCore is retaining lots of small contracts but losing their biggest clients, that 92% might be masking a serious problem." Mia's eyes sharpened. "That's an excellent question. Daniel, do we have that breakdown?" Daniel flipped through his notes, frowning. "Not yet. I can request it from DataCore's team. Do that today, Mia said. That's exactly the kind of detail we need to understand before we make any recommendations. Good catch, Lucas. The meeting continued, but Lucas felt something shift. He'd contributed something useful. He'd spotted a potential issue that even the more experienced team members had missed. Maybe he did belong here after all. When the meeting ended, Mia asked Lucas to stay behind. The others filtered out, chatting about lunch plans, until only the two of them remained in the conference room. Mia closed her laptop and looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "How are you doing?" she asked, and her voice had lost its professional edge. This was the Mia from the sidewalk, the one who'd apologized for making him miss his interview, the one who'd sent him that email his first day. "I'm good," Lucas said. "Learning a lot. Elizabeth is a great supervisor." "She is. She's also tough when she needs to be. Don't let her warmth fool you. If you're not performing, she'll let you know." Mia stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Rain was still falling, turning everything gray and blurred. "I requested you for this team for a reason, Lucas, and it wasn't just because I owe you a debt." "You don't owe me anything," Lucas said automatically. "Yes, I do, but that's not why you're here. You're here because I watched you in that meeting just now. You ask good questions. You think critically. You're not afraid to speak up even though you're the newest person in the room. Those are exactly the qualities I need on this team." "I appreciate the opportunity," Lucas said. Mia turned to face him. "I need you to understand something. This project is important, not just for the company, but for me personally. My father gave me control of this acquisition analysis because he trusts my judgment. If I recommend we move forward and it turns out to be a mistake, that reflects on me, on my capabilities as CTO, on whether I'm ready for the responsibilities I've been given." Lucas heard the weight in her words, the pressure she was carrying. "I'll do everything I can to make sure we get it right." "I know you will. That's why you're here." Mia grabbed her laptop and headed for the door, then paused. "And Lucas? That observation about client retention? That was exactly the kind of thinking we need. Don't hold back. I want your honest analysis, even if it contradicts what everyone else is saying, especially if it contradicts what everyone else is saying. Understood?" "Understood," Lucas said. The next several weeks consumed his life in the best possible way. The DataCore project became his primary focus, with Elizabeth's approval. He spent his days analyzing financial statements, reviewing technology assessments, participating in conference calls with DataCore's leadership team. The work was challenging, complex, the kind of thing that required every bit of his education and intelligence. And Lucas loved it. The team met 3 times a week, sometimes more when new information came in that needed immediate analysis. Lucas found his voice in those meetings, contributing observations and questions that earned nods of approval from Mia and the others. He was becoming part of the team, not just the new guy they had to accommodate. One evening, working late in the conference room with Mia and Daniel, Lucas discovered something that made his stomach drop. He was reviewing DataCore's customer contracts when he noticed a pattern in the termination clauses. Several of their largest clients had contracts that expired within 6 months of each other, all coming due right around the proposed acquisition date. "Mia," Lucas said, interrupting her conversation with Daniel, "I think we might have a problem." He explained what he'd found, walking them through the contract details. If even a few of those large clients chose not to renew, DataCore's revenue could take a significant hit immediately after Carter Industries acquired them. The timing was suspicious, too convenient. Like maybe DataCore's leadership was trying to close this acquisition before those renewals came up, before anyone could see if their big clients were actually planning to stay. Mia's expression hardened as she followed his logic. "Show me the exact dates." Lucas pulled up his spreadsheet, highlighting the relevant contracts. Mia studied it in silence, her jaw tight. Daniel leaned over to look as well, and Lucas watched his face shift from curiosity to concern. "This changes everything," Daniel said quietly. "It could," Mia corrected, "or it could be coincidence. But we need to know for sure. Lucas, I want you to dig into this. Talk to Rachel in legal, see if she can help you understand the termination language. Talk to James in finance about what the revenue impact would be if some of these contracts don't renew, and see if you can find any indication of communication between DataCore and these clients about renewal terms." "On it," Lucas said. He worked through the night, too caught up in the investigation to feel tired. This was real work, important work, the kind of analysis that could save Carter Industries from a multi-million-dollar mistake. Rachel helped him parse the legal language, confirming his interpretation of the termination clauses. James ran the revenue models, showing exactly how damaging it would be if 3 or 4 of those contracts lapsed. By morning, Lucas had a full report ready. He presented it at an emergency team meeting Mia had called for 8 a.m. before the normal workday even started. The team listened in tense silence as Lucas walked through his findings, showing them the patterns he'd identified, the risks he'd calculated. "Recommendation?" Mia asked when he finished. Lucas took a breath. This was the moment. The moment where he either proved he belonged here or revealed himself as someone who saw problems that didn't exist. "I recommend we request direct communication with DataCore's major clients before proceeding. We need to understand their satisfaction levels and renewal intentions. If DataCore pushes back on that request, that tells us something important. And I recommend we build a contingency plan into our valuation that accounts for potential revenue loss from non-renewals." Mia looked around the table. "Thoughts?" "It's good analysis," Daniel said reluctantly. "I hate that it complicates our timeline, but Lucas is right. We need this information before we can make a responsible recommendation." The others nodded agreement. Rachel volunteered to draft the request to DataCore's leadership. Sarah offered to help build the contingency models. What had been a straightforward acquisition analysis was now something more complex, more uncertain, but it was also more honest, more real. After the meeting, Mia asked Lucas to walk with her. They took the elevator down to the lobby and out onto the street, where the morning sun was just starting to burn through the clouds. Mia didn't say anything for a full block, just walked with her hands in her pockets, her expression thoughtful. "You just made this project a lot harder," she finally said. Lucas's heart sank. "I'm sorry. I just thought—" "You thought correctly," Mia interrupted. "You did exactly what I asked you to do. You found a problem everyone else missed, and you brought it to the team. That's your job, Lucas. That's why you're here. I'm not upset with you. I'm upset that this complicates everything, but that's not your fault. That's DataCore's fault for not being transparent." They stopped at a coffee cart. Mia ordered 2 coffees without asking what Lucas wanted, just handed him one when it was ready. They walked another block in silence, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been sitting in the pot too long. "My father called me last night," Mia said. "Asked how the DataCore project was going. I told him we were making progress, that the team was strong, that I was confident in our analysis. Then you found this issue with the contracts, and suddenly everything I told him feels premature." "We'll figure it out," Lucas said. "The team is good. We'll get the information we need and make the right recommendation." Mia smiled slightly. "You sound very certain for someone who's been here less than 2 months." "I learned from someone that you need to do what's right, even when it's hard," Lucas said. "Especially when it's hard. Even if it costs you something." Mia stopped walking and looked at him directly. "I never thanked you properly. For what you did that day. For stopping. For staying. For choosing to help me, even though it cost you everything you'd been working toward." "You gave me a job," Lucas said. "That seems like pretty substantial thanks." "That's not the same thing. The job is because you're qualified and capable. The gratitude is because you're a good person. Those are separate things, Lucas, and I wanted you to know—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That day changed me. Not just because I ended up in the hospital and had to confront how badly I'd been treating myself, but because you showed me that there are still people who care about strangers, who do the right thing without calculating the cost. In this city, in this industry, that's rare. So thank you. Really." Lucas didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They finished their coffees and walked back to the office, the morning crowd flowing around them like water around stones. Back upstairs, back to work, back to the project that was now more complicated than anyone had expected. The following week brought the response from DataCore. They were defensive about the request to contact their clients directly, citing confidentiality concerns and established relationships. But under pressure from Mia and her team, they eventually agreed to facilitate a limited number of client interviews, with DataCore representatives present. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Lucas participated in 3 of those interviews, listening carefully to the carefully worded responses from Datacor's clients. They all praised the technology. They all acknowledged the value of the relationship. But when asked directly about renewal intentions, they all gave versions of the same answer. We're evaluating all our vendor relationships, and we'll make decisions based on what's best for our business. Corporate speak for "we haven't decided yet," or worse, corporate speak for "we're already looking for alternatives." Lucas compiled his notes and shared them with the team. The picture that emerged wasn't encouraging. Datacor's largest clients were satisfied with the current service, but they weren't enthusiastic. They weren't locked in. They were evaluating options, which meant they were vulnerable to competitors, which meant Datacor's revenue base was less stable than their retention numbers suggested. "We need to present this to the board," Mia said during their final team meeting before the board presentation. "They need to understand what we've found, both positive and negative, and we need to make a clear recommendation." "What's your recommendation?" Daniel asked. Mia looked around this table, her gaze lingering on each team member before returning to Daniel. "I think we should pass on this acquisition. The technology is good, but the client base is too unstable. The timing of those contract renewals is suspicious, and Datacor's leadership has been defensive and evasive instead of transparent. Those are all red flags. I don't think the risk is worth the potential reward." "The board won't like that," Sarah said. "They've been excited about this acquisition for months." "Then we'll need to explain why they should be less excited," Mia said firmly. "Our job isn't to tell the board what they want to hear, it's to tell them what they need to hear. And they need to hear that this acquisition is riskier than it appears." The board presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the top floor conference room, the one with panoramic windows and a table that could seat 30 people. Lucas had never been on the executive floor before. He'd certainly never presented to the board of directors. His hands were shaking when he arrived, carrying his laptop and a folder of backup materials he hoped he wouldn't need. The board members filtered in over the next 10 minutes. Serious-looking men and women in expensive suits, the kind of people who made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. Richard Carter sat at the head of the table, flanked by other executives Lucas recognized from company newsletters but had never met. Mia stood at the front of the room, calm and composed, waiting for everyone to settle. "Thank you all for your time," Mia began once the room quieted. "We're here to present our findings on the proposed Datacore Systems acquisition. Over the past 8 weeks, our team has conducted a comprehensive analysis of Datacore's technology, financials, client base, and strategic fit with Carter Industries. What we've found is both encouraging and concerning." She walked them through the positive aspects first: the innovative technology, the growth potential, the strategic value of entering the predictive analytics market. Then she shifted to the concerns, and Lucas saw several board members lean forward, their attention sharpening. Lucas Reed from our strategic development team identified a pattern in Datacore's client contracts that raised questions about the stability of their revenue base, Mia said, and Lucas felt everyone's eyes turn toward him. "Lucas, would you walk the board through your findings?" Lucas stood on shaking legs and walked to the front of the room. He'd practiced this presentation a dozen times, but suddenly his carefully prepared remarks felt inadequate. These people didn't want to hear him recite data. They wanted to understand what it meant. "Datacore's client retention rate is 92%, Lucas began, pulling up his first slide. "That sounds strong, but when you look at who they're retaining, the picture changes. They're keeping most of their small clients, the ones that generate minimal revenue and are relatively easy to satisfy, but their largest clients, the ones that account for 60% of their revenue, all have contracts that expire within the next 6 to 9 months. He walked them through the analysis, the contract terms, the termination clauses, the evasive responses from client interviews, the financial impact if even a few of those contracts lapsed. The board members listened in silence, occasionally making notes but never interrupting. "Our assessment is that Datacore's leadership may be aware of potential client defections and is trying to complete this acquisition before those issues become visible," Lucas concluded. "We can't prove that definitively, but the pattern is concerning enough that we believe it represents a significant risk to this acquisition." He sat down, his heart pounding. Mia took over, presenting the team's final recommendation: pass on the acquisition, and continue monitoring Datacorp's performance over the next year to see if their client base stabilizes. The board asked questions for 40 minutes. Tough questions, skeptical questions, the kind of questions that tested whether the team had really done their homework or was just being overly cautious. Mia handled most of them, but several times she directed questions to Lucas, trusting him to defend his analysis. And he did, speaking with a confidence he'd developed over the past 8 weeks of deep work on this project. Finally, Richard Carter spoke for the first time. Mia, this is your project, your analysis, your recommendation. Are you confident in this assessment? Yes, Mia said without hesitation. I believe pursuing this acquisition would expose Carter Industries to unnecessary risk. The technology is attractive, but it's not worth the price if we're buying a company whose major clients are preparing to leave. Richard looked around the table. Board members, I suggest we follow the team's recommendation. I'd rather pass on an opportunity than walk into a problem we could have foreseen. All in favor? Hands rose around the table. Not everyone. Lucas saw 2 board members who kept their hands down, clearly disagreeing with the decision, but it was a clear majority. The Datacorp acquisition was dead. Thank you, Mia and team, Richard said. Excellent work. This is exactly the kind of analysis we need before making major investments. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, some stopping to shake Mia's hand or offer congratulations to the team. Lucas gathered his materials, relief and exhaustion washing over him in equal measure. They'd done it. They'd completed the analysis, identified the risks, and made a recommendation that the board had accepted. He'd contributed to that, meaningfully, significantly. Lucas, Richard Carter said, and Lucas turned to find the CEO standing beside him. That was impressive work. Mia told me you were the one who identified the contract issue. That's the kind of attention to detail that prevents costly mistakes. Thank you, sir, Lucas said. The whole team contributed to, I know how teams work, Richard interrupted, but his tone was kind. Everyone contributes, but some contributions matter more than others. You found something everyone else missed, and you had the courage to bring it to the team even though it complicated the project. That takes integrity. It just seemed like the right thing to do, Lucas said. Richard smiled. That seems to be a pattern with you. Keep doing the right thing, Mr. Reed. It's serving you well. He walked away, leaving Lucas standing alone in the emptying conference room. Through the windows, the city spread out below. Thousands of buildings full of people making decisions about their careers, their futures, their lives. 8 weeks ago, Lucas had been one of those people, uncertain and struggling. Now he was here, on the top floor of Carter Industries, having just presented to the board of directors and received praise from the CEO. All because he'd stopped in a crosswalk and helped someone who needed it. No, that wasn't right either. The opportunity had come from helping Mia. But everything since then, every success, every contribution, every moment of proving himself, that had been him. His work, his effort, his choice to show up every day and be the best version of himself he could manage. The opportunity had opened the door, but Lucas had walked through it and made something of what he found on the other side. You coming? Mia asked from the doorway. The team's going out to celebrate. You should join us. Absolutely, Lucas said, grabbing his laptop. They went to a nicer restaurant than the dive bar Lucas usually frequented with Marcus, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list. The Datacorp team claimed a large table in the back and ordered appetizers and drinks, the mood celebratory despite having just killed a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Or maybe because of it. They'd done their jobs honestly, and the board had listened. That felt like a win regardless of the outcome. Over dinner, Lucas found himself sitting next to Mia, both of them slightly removed from the louder conversation happening at the other end of the table. How are you feeling? Mia asked. Exhausted, Lucas admitted. But good. Really good. You should. What you did today, presenting to the board in your second month, most people don't get that opportunity until they've been here 2 or 3 years. You handled it perfectly. I was terrified, Lucas said. So was I the first time I presented to the board. Still am, every time, if I'm honest. But that's good. It means you understand the stakes, that you care about getting it right. Mia took a sip of her wine. I'm going to request you for my next project, if Elizabeth will let me have you again. I'd like that, Lucas said. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily now that the pressure of the project was gone. Lucas learned that Mia had joined Carter Industries right out of graduate school, that she'd worked her way up from junior developer to CTO over 10 years, that her father had actually been harder on her than on other employees because he didn't want anyone to think she'd been given her position due to nepotism. She'd earned every promotion, every responsibility, every bit of authority she held. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked. "Working for your father's company? Not having your own separate identity?" Mia considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when I was younger, I thought about leaving, starting over somewhere else where no one knew my last name. But then I realized I'd be running from something instead of towards something, and I'm good at what I do here. I love this company. It's not perfect, but it's trying to be better. That matters to me." "It matters to me too," Lucas said. The evening wound down around 10. Team members said their goodbyes and headed home, tired but satisfied. Lucas rode the subway back to his apartment, replaying moments from the day, the board presentation, Richard's praise, Mia's offer to work together again. He'd proven himself today, not just to them, but to himself. He belonged here. He could do this work. He had value to contribute. His apartment felt smaller than ever when he walked in, the walls too close, the ceiling too low. Lucas sat on his bed and opened his laptop, pulling up real estate listings for bigger places. Nothing fancy. Just a one-bedroom in a better neighborhood, maybe closer to the office, somewhere that felt like a real home instead of a place he was just passing through. He could afford it now. The salary Richard had offered was more than enough to cover rent in a nicer building with money left over for savings. Lucas bookmarked a few promising listings to visit over the weekend, allowing himself to imagine what it would feel like to have space to breathe, to cook actual meals in a real kitchen, to wake up in a bedroom with windows that didn't face a brick wall. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "How did the big presentation go?" Lucas smiled and typed back, "Really well. I'll call you tomorrow and tell you everything." Her response came immediately. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your father would be too." Lucas stared at those words, feeling something tight in his chest. His father had died when Lucas was 15, too young to really understand what he was losing. But he'd left behind lessons about integrity, about working hard, about treating people with dignity and respect. Lucas thought about what his father would say if he could see him now, sitting in this apartment after presenting to a board of directors, building a career at a company that valued the same things his father had valued. He'd say to keep going, to stay humble, to remember that success wasn't just about what you achieved, but about who you became in the process of achieving it. Lucas set his phone down and closed his laptop. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and do it all again. Show up at the office, tackle whatever new challenges came his way, continue proving that the opportunity Richard had given him wasn't a mistake. But tonight, he let himself feel proud of how far he'd come in such a short time. From a warehouse worker counting boxes to a strategic analyst presenting to the board. From unemployed and desperate to building a real career. From someone who'd lost everything by helping a stranger to someone who'd gained everything because he'd chosen compassion over ambition. The universe had strange ways of evening things out. Lucas was just grateful he'd been paying attention when his moment arrived. He fell asleep thinking about Monday, about the next project Mia might staff him on, about the future that was unfolding one day at a time. It was a good future, one worth waking up for, one worth working hard to protect and develop and grow into something even better. Lucas Reed was exactly where he was supposed to be, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. Lucas moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a building with an actual doorman and windows that overlooked a park instead of a brick wall. He bought furniture that wasn't secondhand, cooked meals in a kitchen with full-sized appliances, and stopped checking his bank account with dread every time he needed to buy groceries. The transformation from struggling to stable happened so gradually he almost didn't notice it, until one morning he woke up and realized he wasn't anxious anymore. Just quietly, steadily okay. Work became less about proving himself and more about contributing to something larger. Elizabeth put him on 3 more major projects after DataCore, each one building his skills and reputation within the company. He learned to read market trends, to spot patterns in data that others missed, to present complex analysis in ways that made sense to executives who didn't have time for unnecessary details. Marcus became a close friend, the kind who showed up at Lucas's apartment with pizza on Friday nights to complain about work and argue about basketball. Jasmine from marketing started dating someone in Lucas's division, and suddenly the four of them were going to dinner together, building the kind of social life Lucas had been too busy surviving to create before. But it was the work with Mia that changed everything. She requested him for 2 more projects after DataCore, both high-stakes analyses that required the same careful attention to detail and willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. They developed a rhythm, a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. Mia pushed him to think bigger, to look beyond the immediate problem to see the larger strategic implications. Lucas pushed back when her perfectionism bordered on self-destruction, reminding her of the same lessons Elizabeth had taught him about sustainability and balance. One evening in late November, working late on a competitive analysis project, Mia looked up from her laptop and said, "You know what I appreciate about you, Lucas?" They were alone in the conference room, the city lights twinkling through the windows like earthbound stars. Lucas glanced up from the spreadsheet he'd been reviewing. "My devastating charm and wit?" "Your honesty," Mia said, ignoring his attempt at humor. "You're not afraid to tell me when you think I'm wrong. Most people who work with the CEO's daughter are too worried about politics to be genuine, but you've never treated me like I'm anything other than your colleague, like I'm just Mia, not Mia Carter." "That's because you are just Mia," Lucas said. "At least, that's who you were when I met you. Some woman who needed help in a crosswalk. Everything else came later." Mia smiled slightly. "You know what my therapist said? She said that day was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. That I needed to collapse, literally and figuratively, because I'd been holding everything together through sheer force of will for too long. The data breach, the pressure, the responsibility. It was crushing me. And I couldn't admit it. Didn't want to admit it, because admitting weakness felt like failure." "It's not weakness," Lucas said. "It's human. I know that now. Took 3 months of therapy to really understand it. But I get it." Mia closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "I've been thinking about something. Richard is stepping back from daily operations next year. He'll still be CEO, but he wants to focus more on long-term strategy and less on managing projects, which means the executive team needs to step up and take on more responsibility." Lucas wasn't sure where this was going, so he just nodded and waited for her to continue. "I'm recommending you for promotion," Mia said. "Senior analyst in strategic development. It comes with a significant raise, more autonomy, and the opportunity to lead your own projects instead of just contributing to others." "You've earned it, Lucas." Multiple times over. Lucas felt something warm bloom in his chest. A promotion. 6 months ago, he'd been desperate for any job at all. Now he was being promoted within a company he'd never expected to work for in the first place. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," Mia said. "Say you'll keep being the person who asks hard questions and tells uncomfortable truths. Say you'll keep making this company better by refusing to settle for good enough when we could be great." "I accept," Lucas said, and Mia's smile widened into something genuine and warm. "Good. Elizabeth is going to officially offer it to you tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you myself. To thank you, actually, for the DataCore project, for all the projects since then, for being someone I can trust to do the work right, instead of just doing it quickly." "You gave me the opportunity," Lucas said. "All I did was try to live up to it." "You did more than that," Mia said softly. "You reminded me why I love this work, why it matters. Not because of the money, or the prestige, or the title on my business card, but because when we do it right, we help build something meaningful, something that creates opportunities for other people, like the opportunity my father gave you, like the opportunity you're going to give someone else someday when you're in a position to make those decisions." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that only exists between people who've worked hard together and come through it stronger. Lucas thought about the intersection where this had all started, about the choice that had felt like losing everything but had actually been the beginning of gaining more than he'd imagined possible. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said. "That day, when I helped you, did you know? Did you have any idea that helping you would lead to all this?" Mia shook her head. I was barely conscious, Lucas. I didn't know anything except that I felt terrible and some stranger was being kind to me. I certainly didn't plan any of this. Didn't think, oh, I'll find this nice man a job as a reward. I was just grateful someone stopped. So this really is all just, Lucas gestured vaguely, trying to capture the improbable chain of events. Coincidence? Luck? The universe working in mysterious ways? I prefer to think of it as consequences, Mia said. Not the bad kind, the good kind. You made a choice that day. You chose to be the kind of person who helps, who cares, who puts someone else's well-being ahead of your own immediate interests. And that choice had consequences. It led you here. But it's not like the universe rewarded you for being good. It's that your character created opportunities. My father noticed you because of what you did, yes, but he hired you because of who you are. Everything since then, the promotions, the projects, the career you're building, that's all you. That's the consequence of continuing to be that person every single day. Lucas absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. She was right. The opportunity had come from helping Mia, but everything else had come from his own choices, his own work, his own refusal to waste the second chance he'd been given. That felt important. It meant this wasn't just luck. It was something he'd earned through consistent effort and unwavering values. Thank you, Lucas said, for everything, for the projects, for the recommendation, for trusting me when I was still figuring everything out. Thank you for stopping, Mia said simply. For being the one person who cared enough to help a stranger. You probably saved my life that day, Lucas. At minimum, you saved me from serious injury. That's not something I take lightly. They packed up their laptops and rode the elevator down together, parting ways in the lobby with plans to meet again next week for their next project kickoff. Lucas walked out into the November cold, his breath fogging in the air, and felt something settle into place. This was his life now. Not the struggling, barely making it life he'd had before. Not the desperate, anxious, uncertain existence of someone who didn't know where next month's rent would come from. This was stability, purpose, a future built on solid ground instead of shifting sand. Elizabeth made the promotion official the next morning, calling Lucas into her office with a formal offer letter and a congratulations that felt genuinely warm. The raise was substantial, more than Lucas had been making at his previous job before the layoffs, more than he'd thought possible to earn at his age. He signed the paperwork with a hand that didn't shake, thanked Elizabeth for her mentorship and guidance, and walked back to his desk feeling like he'd crossed some invisible threshold into a version of himself he'd always hoped to become. Marcus was waiting at his desk with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing grin. Heard you got promoted. Senior analyst. That's impressive, man. 6 months from new hire to senior analyst? That's not normal. I had good projects, Lucas said, accepting the coffee. Good mentors. I got lucky. You got noticed, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Plenty of people get good projects and squander them. You did the work. You earned this. Word spread quickly through the office. Jasmine stopped by to congratulate him. Daniel from the DataCore team sent an email saying Lucas had earned the promotion twice over. Even people Lucas had barely worked with made a point of acknowledging his achievement, and he realized he'd become part of the fabric of this place in a way he hadn't quite understood before. He wasn't the new guy anymore. He was a colleague, a contributor, someone people respected and wanted to work with. That evening, Lucas called his mother to share the news. She cried again. Happy tears, proud tears, the kind mothers cry when they watch their children succeed against odds that once seemed insurmountable. They talked for an hour, and Lucas told her everything he hadn't been able to articulate before. How scared he'd been during those months of unemployment. How close he'd come to giving up. How a single choice, stopping to help someone who needed it, had somehow rewired the trajectory of his entire life. Your father would be so proud, his mother said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just because of the promotion, but because of who you are. The kind of man who stops to help strangers, who does the right thing even when it costs him something. That's the person he tried to be, and that's the person he wanted you to become. I miss him, Lucas said quietly. I know, baby. I do too. But he's with you in every good choice you make. Every time you choose kindness over convenience, every time you help someone who needs it, that's him living on through you. They said their goodbyes, and Lucas sat alone in his apartment feeling the weight of gratitude and grief and joy all tangled together. He'd built something here, not just a career, but a life. One his father would have been proud of, one he was proud of. The holidays came and went. Carter Industries threw a massive party at a downtown hotel, complete with a band and an open bar, and a formal dinner where Richard Carter gave a speech about the company's achievements over the past year. Lucas attended with Marcus and Jasmine and her boyfriend, the four of them claiming a table near the back where they could observe the spectacle without being too much a part of it. Mia made an appearance, elegant in a black dress, and caught Lucas's eye across the room with a small smile of acknowledgement. Richard's speech was good, touching on the challenges the company had faced, the successes they'd achieved, the values that had guided them through difficult decisions. He talked about integrity and innovation and the importance of building a company culture where people felt valued and respected. And then, toward the end, he said something that made Lucas sit up straighter. This year, we made a decision to pass on an acquisition that looked good on paper but didn't hold up under scrutiny. That decision saved us from a costly mistake, and it happened because we have people on our team who aren't afraid to ask hard questions and challenge assumptions. People who understand that doing the right thing sometimes means saying no, even when yes would be easier. That's the kind of company we are. That's the kind of people we hire. And I'm incredibly proud of everyone who contributed to our success this year. Richard's gaze swept the room and landed, for just a moment, on Lucas. It was brief, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Lucas saw it, and he understood the message. This was acknowledgement, recognition, a CEO letting him know that his contributions hadn't gone unnoticed. January brought new projects and new challenges. Lucas led his first project team, a market analysis for a potential expansion into the European market. He had 4 people reporting to him, all of them older and more experienced than he was, and the responsibility felt both terrifying and exhilarating. But he approached it the same way he'd approached everything else, with humility, curiosity, and a willingness to admit when he didn't know something. The team responded well to his leadership style. He created space for people to contribute their expertise, ask questions that drew out their best thinking, and made decisions with clear reasoning that people could understand even when they didn't fully agree. By the end of the 3-month project, they'd produced a comprehensive analysis that recommended a phased entry strategy for the European market, starting with Germany and expanding to other countries based on performance metrics and market conditions. The presentation to the executive team went smoothly. Richard asked pointed questions, but Lucas had anticipated most of them and had solid answers prepared. When it was over, Richard nodded approvingly and said, "Good work. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need as we expand internationally." Lucas walked out of that meeting feeling 10 feet tall. He'd led a team. He'd delivered results. He'd proven that the promotion hadn't been premature, that he could handle the increased responsibility and higher expectations that came with his new position. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days and a sense of renewal that matched Lucas's internal landscape. He'd been at Carter Industries for almost a year now, and the person he'd been when he started, anxious, uncertain, desperately trying to prove himself, felt like a different version of himself. Not worse, just younger, less experienced, still figuring out who he wanted to be. One afternoon in April, David Chen called Lucas and asked him to come up to the executive floor. Lucas went with curiosity rather than nervousness. He'd been to this floor enough times now that it didn't intimidate him the way it once had. David met him at the elevator and led him to Richard's office, where the CEO was waiting with Mia and Elizabeth. "Lucas," Richard said, gesturing to an empty chair, "thank you for coming up. We wanted to talk to you about an opportunity." Lucas sat, glancing between the 3 of them and trying to read the room. This felt significant, but he couldn't tell if it was good significant or complicated significant. "We're creating a new position," Mia explained, "Director of Strategic Initiatives. It would report directly to me and would be responsible for identifying and analyzing high-impact opportunities across all divisions, not just acquisitions, but partnerships, market expansions, technology investments, anything that could significantly advance our strategic goals." "It's a big role," Elizabeth added, "bigger than what you're doing now. It would require you to work across departments, build relationships with senior leadership, and make recommendations that directly influence our long-term direction." Lucas felt his heart rate pick up. A director position. That was several levels above where he was now. That was the kind of role people spent years working toward. "I'm honored," he said carefully. "But I've only been here a year. Don't you need someone with more experience?" "We need someone with the right qualities," Richard said. "Someone who thinks critically, asks hard questions, and isn't afraid to challenge assumptions. Someone who's proven they can handle increasing responsibility without letting it compromise their judgment or values. You've demonstrated all of that, Lucas, multiple times over." "Think about it," Mia said. "You don't have to answer right now, but we wanted you to know we're considering you for this role, that we trust you with this level of responsibility." Lucas left the meeting in a daze, riding the elevator down to his floor while his mind spun with possibilities. A director position. A role that would put him in the same meetings as VPs and C-suite executives. A level of influence he'd never imagined achieving, certainly not this quickly. He called his mother that night and told her about the opportunity. She listened quietly, and when he finished, she said, "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know," Lucas admitted. "It's a lot of responsibility. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail?" "Lucas," his mother said gently, "you stopped to help a stranger in a crosswalk even though it cost you a job interview. You did it because it was the right thing to do without calculating the cost or expecting a reward. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. And character is what matters when the pressure is on and the decisions are hard. You're ready for this. You've been ready since the day you chose compassion over ambition." Her words settled over him like a blessing. She was right. He was ready. Maybe not perfectly prepared, maybe not equipped with every skill and experience he'd eventually need, but ready in the ways that mattered most. Ready to work hard, ready to ask for help when he needed it, ready to make difficult choices guided by values that wouldn't shift when things got complicated. Lucas called Mia the next morning and told her he wanted the position. She sounded pleased but not surprised, like she'd known what his answer would be before he did. The transition happened quickly. Within 2 weeks, Lucas had a new office. Not huge, but his own space with a door that closed and a window that overlooked the city. His team consisted of 3 analysts he'd handpicked from various departments, smart people who shared his commitment to rigorous analysis and honest assessment. His first project was evaluating a potential partnership with a renewable energy company, and he dove into it with the same intensity he'd brought to DataCore a year earlier. The work was challenging in new ways. He was making decisions that affected millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. He was presenting to the board regularly, fielding questions from people who'd been doing this work since before he was born. But he'd learned from every project, every mistake, every success over the past year, and he brought all of that accumulated wisdom to his new role. Summer arrived with heat waves and thunderstorms that turned the city into a humid pressure cooker. On a Thursday afternoon in July, Lucas was working late in his office when Mia knocked on his open door. "Got a minute?" she asked. Of course. Lucas saved his work and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "What's up?" Mia sat down and Lucas noticed she looked tired. Not the dangerous, about to collapse exhaustion from the crosswalk, but the normal tiredness of someone who'd been working hard and pushing themselves. "I wanted to talk to you about something. It's about the day we met." Lucas's attention sharpened. They rarely talked about that day anymore, both of them having moved past it into a working relationship that didn't need constant reference to its unusual origin. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately," Mia continued, "about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped, if you just kept walking like everyone else. And the truth is, I probably would have collapsed in the middle of that intersection. I probably would have been hit by a car or caused a massive accident. At minimum, I would have been seriously injured. At worst," she trailed off, but the implication was clear. "But that didn't happen," Lucas said gently. "I did stop. You're okay." "Because of you," Mia insisted. "Because one person chose to care more about a stranger's safety than his own convenience. And I've been thinking about how rare that is. How many people go through life focused entirely on their own goals, their own problems, their own deadlines. They're not bad people. They're just too busy, too stressed, too focused on surviving to stop and help someone else." "I get it," Lucas said. "I spent 3 months like that when I was unemployed. Every day was just about getting through, finding the next opportunity, figuring out how to survive. I didn't have the luxury of thinking about anyone else's problems. But you did, Mia said. When it mattered, you did. And that's what I've been thinking about. How to create a culture where people can afford to be generous, where they're not so stressed and overworked and desperate that they can't stop to help someone in need. Lucas leaned back in his chair, understanding where this was going. You want to change something here at Carter Industries. I want to start a program, Mia said, a mentorship initiative where senior employees are paired with people who are struggling to break into their careers, not internships, actual paid positions with training and support and a clear path to advancement. People like you were a year ago, Lucas, qualified, talented, desperate for an opportunity, but unable to get one because no one will take a chance on them. That's a big undertaking, Lucas said. I know, but I think it's important. I think if we're going to be the kind of company that talks about values and integrity, we need to back that up with action. We need to create opportunities for people who've been overlooked or knocked down. People who need someone to stop and help them up. Lucas felt something warm and bright bloom in his chest. This was it. This was how good things multiplied. Not by one person receiving help and being grateful, but by that person turning around and extending the same help to others, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond the original act of kindness. I love it, Lucas said. What do you need from me? I need you to help me design it, Mia said. You were on the other side of this a year ago. You know what it feels like to be desperate for an opportunity, to have skills and education and potential, but no way to prove yourself. I need your perspective to make sure this program actually helps people instead of just making us feel good about ourselves. They spent the next 2 months designing the program together, working late nights and weekends to create something meaningful. They called it the Carter Opportunity Initiative, and it would bring in 20 candidates each year, people with potential but limited opportunities, and give them 1-year paid positions with mentorship, training, and a guarantee of serious consideration for permanent roles if they performed well. The board approved the program in September. Richard personally championed it, telling the board that Carter Industries had been built on the principle of recognizing potential over pedigree, and this program would formalize that value in a way that could change lives. The first cohort would start in January, and Lucas would oversee the program in addition to his strategic initiatives work. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 1 year after Lucas had helped Mia in that crosswalk, he stood in the same conference room where he'd presented the data core analysis and looked out at the city below. Everything looked different from up here, bigger and smaller at the same time. A web of interconnected lives and choices and consequences, all of them mattering more than anyone could fully understand. His phone buzzed, a text from Mia. Coffee? I'm on 28. Lucas smiled and headed down to her floor. They'd developed a routine of grabbing coffee together once a week, sometimes talking about work, sometimes just talking about life. Today they ended up on the outdoor terrace, even though the morning air had a bite to it that promised winter wasn't far off. I was thinking, Mia said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup for warmth, about what you said once, about how I should remember that I'm just Mia, not Mia Carter, that my last name doesn't define who I am. I remember, Lucas said. You were right. But you know what else is true? I am Mia Carter. That's part of who I am, and I don't have to run from it or apologize for it. I just have to make sure I'm using that privilege to create opportunities for other people instead of hoarding it for myself. That's what the initiative is about, taking the advantages I've had and extending them to people who deserve a chance. That's exactly what it's about, Lucas agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up below them. Lucas thought about the person he'd been a year ago, desperate, uncertain, convinced his best opportunities had already passed him by. That person couldn't have imagined standing here now, a director at one of the best companies in the city, helping design a program that would change lives the way his life had been changed. Thank you, Lucas said suddenly. For everything. For the opportunity. For trusting me. For pushing me to be better than I thought I could be. For turning one moment of basic human decency into something that changed my entire life. You changed your own life, Mia said. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built something on the other side. She paused, then added, But you're welcome. And thank you for stopping, for caring, for being the kind of person who helps. They finished their coffee and went back inside, back to their respective offices and the work that waited. Lucas sat at his desk and pulled up the files for the Carter Opportunity Initiative, reviewing applications from the first round of candidates. Each one represented someone like him, talented but struggling, qualified but overlooked, desperately hoping for the chance to prove what they could do. Lucas was going to help give them that chance, because someone had given it to him, because kindness multiplied when you passed it forward instead of just holding it close, because the best way to honor an opportunity was to create opportunities for others. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard Carter. Lucas answered, curious. "Lucas," Richard said, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything urgent." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to personally thank you for your work on the Opportunity Initiative. Mia tells me you've been instrumental in designing the program. That means a lot to me, seeing you take what was given to you and use it to help others. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need more of." "I'm happy to do it," Lucas said. "I remember what it felt like to be on the other side, to need someone to take a chance on me. If we can provide that for even a few people, it's worth the effort." "It's worth far more than that," Richard said. "You know, when I watched that security footage of you helping Mia, what struck me most wasn't just that you stopped. It was that you stayed. You didn't just make sure she wasn't going to die and then rush off to your interview. You sat with her, made sure she was really okay, sacrificed your opportunity to give her what she needed in that moment. That's rare, Lucas. That's the kind of character you can't teach." "I just did what anyone should do," Lucas said. "But most people don't," Richard said quietly. "Most people calculate the cost and decide it's too high. They walk past. They assume someone else will help. They prioritize their own needs over someone else's crisis. You didn't. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you are and what kind of leader you'll become." They talked for a few more minutes about the initiative and some upcoming projects, and then Richard let him go. Lucas sat at his desk for a long moment, staring out his window at the city that had almost broken him before giving him more than he'd ever expected. His life wasn't perfect. He still worked too many hours sometimes. He still felt the pressure of high expectations and the weight of responsibility. But he also had purpose, community, a career that meant something beyond just paying bills and surviving. He had the satisfaction of knowing that his work mattered, that the choices he made affected people's lives in positive ways. And it had all started with one choice in a crosswalk, one moment of choosing compassion over ambition, one decision to be the kind of person who stopped to help, even when the cost was high. Lucas thought about all the people who'd walked past Mia that day. They'd had their reasons, deadlines to meet, places to be, problems of their own to solve. He didn't judge them. He understood. Life was hard, and everyone was fighting battles no one else could see, but he was glad he'd stopped. Glad he'd been the one person who'd chosen differently, not because of what it had gotten him, though the outcome had been beyond anything he could have imagined, but because it had confirmed something important about who he was, about who he wanted to continue being. Success wasn't just about climbing ladders and earning promotions and impressing the right people. It was about staying true to your values when doing so was difficult. It was about helping others even when it cost you something. It was about building a life that mattered beyond just your own needs and desires. Lucas Reed had built that life. He was still building it, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of deciding to be the person who stopped instead of the person who kept walking. And as he turned back to his work, reviewing applications from people who desperately needed the same chance he'd been given, Lucas understood that this was what success actually looked like. Not a destination you arrived at, but a direction you kept moving in. Not something you achieved once, but something you lived every single day. He was living it now, and he'd keep living it for as long as he had the chance. Because that's what you did when someone opened a door for you. You walked through it with gratitude and humility, worked hard to prove you deserved the opportunity, and then you turned around and held the door open for the next person who needed it. That was the real reward. Not the promotion or the salary or the corner office, though those things were nice. The real reward was knowing that your life had meaning beyond yourself, that your choices rippled outward and changed things for people you might never meet, that kindness multiplied when you let it. Lucas closed his laptop and stood, stretching muscles that had gotten stiff from sitting too long. The sun was setting outside his window, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. Tomorrow he'd wake up and do it all again, work hard, ask hard questions, help people who needed helping, and continue building a career on a foundation of integrity and compassion. But tonight, he'd go home to his apartment with the view and the real kitchen and the life he'd built from almost nothing. He'd call his mother and tell her about his day. Maybe grab dinner with Marcus. Live the quiet, ordinary life of someone who'd survived the hard times and come out the other side into something better. It wasn't a dramatic ending. There was no final triumph, no ultimate vindication. Just the steady, satisfying knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, becoming exactly who he'd always hoped to become. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Lucas turned off his office light and headed for the elevator, ready to go home. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to keep being the person who stopped, who helped, who cared. Even when it was hard, especially when it mattered. Because in the end, that's what defined a life well lived. Not the titles or the achievements or the money in the bank, but the moments when you chose kindness over convenience. When you put someone else's well-being ahead of your own ambition. When you were the one person who stopped. Lucas had been that person once. He'd be that person again tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that followed. Not because he expected rewards, but because it was simply who he was. And that, more than anything else, was what made him successful.